coffee or find your seat again, we'll get started right away here. Excellent. Wow, our first town hall. How very exciting. I want to thank everyone in the room for their time today and for making this a priority. I understand the many pulls on your time and appreciate that you, our members, and our panelists have made it a priority. Judging from today's registration for the meeting, which is, I think our numbers are a little lower than what we expected due to road conditions, but we definitely know that there's a real thirst for forums such as this, and my hope is that it's the first of many. Deputy Minister Jay Rogers will be joining us very shortly. He had a bit of a conflict in his calendar, but will be here as soon as possible. The town hall occurring today is as a result of meeting with Jay. He and Michelle Dubik, our Assistant Deputy Minister, second from the left, I'm getting that. They have offered to come and meet with the Government Relations Committee of Abilities Manitoba back in September. And at that point, he offered to come out and speak to members, and we started talking about the possibility of doing a town hall. So we know at Abilities, the board and myself certainly know that our members rely on us to be their voice, to take concerns forward, and to work towards resolution and collaborating on a better province. This is something that I certainly take very seriously, and I always do my very best to represent our diverse membership in the many forums that Abilities is honored to share with the department. However, opportunities such as today's town hall are also so critical. It's a chance for you, our members, to ask questions and to dialogue on the current and future services under Community Living Disability Services. I'm sure our members will utilize this great opportunity to have great discussion this afternoon. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our panelists. And if you can just raise your hand as I call your name. So Michelle Dubik, our Assistant Deputy Minister, Sherry Dombrowski, Meredith Dawn, Craig Winans, Nolan Amanot, and Chris Pichet, just arriving. And what I'd like to do, as a refresher and an orienting tool, I'll just ask if we can start with Meredith down at the end. And if you could just introduce yourself, your title, and your role, just to kind of orient people to the room so they know, based on the questions they're asking, kind of who they're expecting an answer from, that would be great.
Yeah, this isn't a disaster waiting. My name is Meredith Dawn, and my title is the Supports Intensity Scale Program Manager, and my role is to help manage our assist facilitators who go out to help administer the Supports Intensity Scale, and that will also include ensuring the inter-rater reliability between the assessment, the facilitators, and ensuring that we have a good process.
Hi everyone, thanks for having us. It's our pleasure to be able to be here and answer some more questions and continue some ongoing dialogue. I'm Michelle Dubik. I'm the Assistant Deputy Minister for the Community Service Delivery Division. Our division is responsible for delivering social services across the province, so employment and income assistance, children's disability, and CLDS, amongst some others. As well as we have responsibility for the policy side or the program side of Community Living Disability Services. So I get to work with these folks and a handful of others on some of the work that we're doing in terms of building on abilities. Our team is divided in half a little bit today because some of them are at a special presentation also on Employment First. So we have a pretty good group here to answer your questions.
Hi everyone, my name is Nolan Amanot. And my title is the Building on Abilities Program Manager. My role with the team has been primarily having conversations with individuals and families who are new entrants to our program, connecting the dots using the support intensity scale to inform person-centered planning and planning with a support budget. So over the past 2 years, I've met with 193 individuals and families, and we've been doing a lot of work with participants and also with training our field staff on how to kind of work in this new model.
Hello, my name is Craig Wild. I'm a program specialist with Community Living Disability Services. I've been leading up the sort of the policy and technical side of the Building on Abilities initiative, and a lot of work with our internal sort of stakeholders, so our CSWs and program manager.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sherry Dombrowski. I'm the Director of Agency and Accountability under Department of Finance in the Department of Families. We are responsible for contracts and also funding agreements and financial reporting for publicly funded agencies.
Hi everyone, my name is Chris Pichet. I'm Controller with the Community Service Delivery Division. My responsibility includes oversight and financial management of the Community Living Disability Services budget, as well with the Building on Abilities team. I've had a lead role in the development of the funding models.
Fantastic, thanks. Welcome everyone. Okay, so Jennifer, would you like to come up? So Jennifer Rodriguez coming up. She spoke a bit this morning as well. She will be moderating the town hall and kind of give us some tips and some of the proceedings that are going to happen, and then we'll get started. Jennifer.
Thanks. Yeah, so just really quickly, this will be sort of a casual format. I know that there's lots of people who have questions in the room. Some people have also submitted some questions to me to ask if there's time or gaps, and so I'm happy to do that. I just want to remind everyone that you must use a microphone when you're speaking, because we are broadcasting to our members who can't be here today. And it's also being recorded so that if there's a member that couldn't log in and catch it live, we can share it with them after. So please be sure to use a microphone when you speak, otherwise our members can't hear you. And then I also just wanted to let everyone know that Michelle has asked that you don't need to specify who you're going to ask your question to, because they will know who is best to answer the specific questions. So we have quite a long time for questions, and so be sure to take care of yourself in the process. The bathrooms are located conveniently in the room here, and then there's coffee and water on the table, so feel free to get up and move about as you need. And so I think I would invite anyone in the room who wants to come to the microphone to kick off the questions. I do have one to start us off while people make their way to the microphone, but please do that. And the first question is regarding the CIS. Virtually half of the entire scale places people at a level 1. With such a diverse score, we are worried about impacts to people. How were the scores linked to levels, and was it done by CLDS or HSRI?
Hi there. So it's important to note that the supports intensity scale and the 7-level system, supports budget level system, and the work that HSRI has helped us with are really two unique and completely separate sort of processes. So Meredith can jump in terms of the standardized assessment tool and all of that the CIS is, and then the supports budget level system is something that the Human Services Research Institute, along with the department, so CLDS, worked closely together. We looked at work in multiple other jurisdictions across North America, and the work that HSRI have done in those jurisdictions to develop the level system. And so again, we did work in consultation with that organization to finalize and confirm the approach and model that we would use in Manitoba, given our unique sort of demographics and system. But again, that system was developed Each jurisdiction has developed a little bit of a unique sort of system that's informed by an assessment tool. It's not always the supports intensity scale. Other jurisdictions have chosen other types of tools. The majority of systems tend to use the supports intensity scale, but some jurisdictions develop a 5-level system or a 3-level system. The majority of systems tend to lean towards the system that we adopted here in Manitoba. Does that answer your question?
I think so. Yeah.
So when Hisry first showed us our data, one of the things they did, and Craig alluded to this, is they talked about the work they've done in other jurisdictions, and one of the things they've done across North America, and they did for Manitoba, was norm our data. So you can look at how, because we started with a sample of people who participated in an SIS assessment, and we looked at that data really as it plays out across a bell curve. And so what they were able to tell Manitoba, compared to other jurisdictions, except very similar to the only other jurisdiction in Canada, I think, Craig, right, was that we normed with a much higher functioning community living population than jurisdictions in the States. And so that did inform some of our norming and where the leveling system fell out.
I just wonder, do you think that we normed in that way because we still operate institutions rather than having everyone living in the community? Or once people move to community with AGM?
So we talked a bit about that and what could potentially be changing how Alberta and ourselves, because I think those were the two jurisdictions that we looked at that normed the data. And we talked about that as one of the possibilities. We talked about Canada is further ahead in diagnosing some other disabilities like fetal alcohol syndrome potentially, and how those play into this population now being captured within the community living program to a degree, not fully, but more represented in the program than they would have been prior to our capacity to diagnose in Manitoba, and Alberta being as strong as it is. I'm not sure, and we will have to do some validating over time to make sure that our leveling system is actually right and working for us, and so that becomes a part of what we have to do in the long term.
Thanks.
Good afternoon. This one?
Oh.
Don't look at how far I'm holding it.
I love technology. Good afternoon. Thank you for coming. It's very much appreciated. About April 1st of 2016, new regulations came in around building code and fire code, and I know that there's a staged response time for some of the upgrades that are required. I'm wondering if you could comment and maybe update membership on what the province is going to be able to do to support us as agencies in complying with those regulations.
That would be a question that I wish Andrea was here and not an employment first conference or conversation. I know that she has done a fairly significant amount of work in the last few weeks and months around some of the building code stuff, but I honestly don't have the details. What we can do is forward some of that to Margot, and she can disseminate some further conversation, and then we can talk about it at our next abilities joint meeting as well, but I don't have the details. Craig, do you really know where they're at on the fire code, building code stuff? No. So we'll have to bring that to you.
In terms of funding or resources that might be available?
There will be both. There will be some resource available, or at least we have a resource ask in, because we recognized all along that the sector will need an investment of money in order to be compliant within the time frame. We have some of those resources right now, and then we need to secure some of them. So we just need to roll out the rollout strategy really around some of that. Okay?
Afternoon. As introduction for myself, just to let you know, I'm a volunteer board member from I'm a rural agency, and I have no family members in care, so I'm just coming as a volunteer. And my questions are to help me understand, so we give direction to our employees, our manager, but to go. So I think my question is best directed at the AGM, if you don't mind. And my first one is, how do you see the agencies represented here? Are we subservient or are we partners in care?
Well, if it's a A-B answer, I'll take B.
Is that the convenient answer?
No, I mean, absolutely. I mean, we see all of the agencies as partners. I think we have, I mean, we're here to serve a population of Manitoba that we want to give the best care we possibly can to. And that's our mandate. That's all what these people come to work for every day. That's their mandate in order. That's to do. We don't get to do that by ourselves. We need to partner with individuals and agencies and support families in order to achieve that mandate. So no, you're absolutely partners.
Okay, with that understood then, are the agencies seen as contractors or a subset of the department?
We have a contractual relationship with the agencies that we partner with.
And the way the contracts are, at least the most recent one that I reviewed, seems to be a mixed bag. There seems to be, in one section, you talk about being a subcontractor, and then there's other relationships where you have the ability to come in and react.
Yeah.
And it's not my business, my background is business.
Yeah.
It doesn't make good business sense for anybody to enter into the spot as it's currently written.
Yeah, I mean, I'll let Sherry take a chunk of this question, but you know, and feel free, Sherry, to disagree with me. I think, you know, government in Manitoba writes a large boilerplate contract, and it's designed to serve many purposes and functions, and they our flexibility in managing and massaging that to our specific need. We get to work within some parameters. They don't like for us to play with the big boilerplate so much. And so it doesn't fit all situations and all relationships equally. And I get that some of the language in there can be a challenge. But we definitely see you as partners. And I think we will continue to make ourselves as available as possible to answer some of the questions with respect to that SPA. I don't know if you want to add it.
Thank you. Definitely partnership. When we consulted with legal services with regards to this master departmental agreement, they had indicated that utilizing the word working partnership would be acceptable, because partnership can mean so many different things as defined. So it had to be clarified in certain parts of the service purchase agreement.
Okay, well, my response will come back from a different direction. Having done contracts with federal and provincial government, I was paid for a service. I provided the service. And when it was all over, the department that I did the service work for didn't come back and say, how did you do? Did you have any money left over? Well, you did. Well, that's my profit. We want to take it back. So if we have a business relationship, why does the department feel that they have this clawback?
Well, with regards to surplus deficit, this is what you're indicating or speaking of?
Just straight operational surplus.
Mm-hmm, right. In the discovery sessions that we had held, surplus is not something that is to be held by a publicly funded agency, and so that's the terminology that is used in the agreement. It's a publicly funded agency.
Well, can I come back then and argue? And I'll argue, make believe. I had to drive by to come into the meeting today. Make believe builds highways for the province of Manitoba. Once the contract is finished, the province doesn't go back to make believe and say, we paid you too much money. Do we not have the same relationship as a contractor providing services?
Well, I'm not sure whether a contractor would be the term that we would utilize. When it's we call individuals that we give public funding to, they're publicly funded agencies, not a contractor. So to speak, it's an agreement. And yes.
I caution you because there is a line item there that declares that there's a contractor relationship between the agency and the provincial government. I'm sorry I don't have it with me, but I remember that.
I have it with me. It would take me a few minutes
Yeah,
to dig through, but that's a good point.
And the other is if this is a true relationship, further into your SPA, it speaks to the fact that if there's any debt, the province, as our partner, is not going to step forward and help us pay the bills. There's no consistency there.
No, that is correct. I mean, obviously there would be conversation meetings, etc., around deficit and what can be done. As a partner, we would work together to determine how we can assist.
But it's not worded that way.
I think it's a reasonable understanding that all departments in the province are going to move forward to support and ensure that your unique service that is so vital to the province, we would support to continue as best we can.
Okay, I like black and white.
Thank you.
Well, no, I've got one if I may. In the question that I raised and trying to get an understanding, there's a number of these agencies, we all look after people, we house them and put them on, and there's other people which I guess are identified by CLDS are individuals in need, and they're supported in the home environment as well as in the agency environment. I think we're correct. And I'm going to go back to the AGM here. Is it understood that these individuals are wards of the state?
No.
Why not?
Sorry, so of the population that is applied for and been determined to be eligible for community living is just over 6,000 participants now. Some of them absolutely receive support services from agencies. Some of them receive supports from their families. Many of them live independently without support in community. They're still eligible for our service. They are covered by the Vulnerable Persons Act, which gives a degree of special protection and a protection mandate that is different or unique to our province. But these are independent adults determined to be self-determining unless otherwise provided for by the vulnerable commissioners.
So the short answer to that may be that if these agencies cease to exist, the state would have to look after them. Having grown up in Selkirk and basically growing up in the mental hospital, that's always been the status. Is that changing now? Because instead of moving people from institutions into the community?
Is that on? Yeah.
You have to hold it closer.
Doesn't have to go back. I'm not sure I'm following your question. Come at it again one more time.
Well, I guess there has been a strong movement to move people out of institutions into the community. If these agencies didn't exist, they would be back in the institutions, correct?
There's definitely, we rely on agencies to support a significant number of this population in a community. Yes.
And if we weren't here, I say you collectively as government, would be responsible for their care?
But we're still responsible for their care, even if they're in an agency.
Okay. So in other words, these individuals are wards of the state?
No.
Okay. I'm missing. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
I'm a little taller now, I'm not gonna mess with Mike. My question goes to BOA and dealing with the families and the people and the individuals that are basically really unaware of the BOA system. So my question goes to how are you planning on communicating BOA and the changes that BOA are going to affect people that are already in the system?
In part, it depends on who we're talking about at different stages. So I think around around, most of what we've done that's really become applicable to people coming into the system right now is around new entrants, right? People coming in new. And so a lot of that communication has happened really through two primary forms, I think. You guys can jump in. Nolan has been the front face of a lot of that communication because we are a fairly large system, and we've tried to make sure we've been giving a consistent message, and so we've done that largely through one point of contact. We can't continue that as that scales up and we're talking about more and more people now, right? But for those coming in that the new funding models applied to, that was those living at home with family. So Nolan did pretty much all of those on your own, I think. And then with supportive independent living, you coming into supported independent living, we started there. Then we spent, I think, a significant amount of time trying to educate our own CSWs around the day service piece, because that was the place where we couldn't continue to rely really on a centralized approach. And so we have tried to upskill our CSWs to provide some of that messaging, again, to new people coming into the system. And I think we've done a fair amount of work with our education colleagues around some of the changes we're making, so that we're, and CDS, Children's Disability Services, to make sure we're sending the same message to families that are coming in. The next chunk of work really has to focus on those that are now already part of community living and some of the changes that are coming. And we'll be doing more of that as we start to work through some of the implementation plans for how some of that's happening. And we'll be starting to host some open forums around learning about SIS or new to CLDS, some of those kinds of things. We will create just open forums for on an ongoing basis. So like kind of a, I don't know, every couple months, a drop-in kind of thing where you can come and learn more about those things.
Do you have a time frame you're going to be looking at that? Because we're talking to our people now, and you're putting new people in the system, and that information is getting out there, and nobody knows what's going on.
Right, and I'll just add a little bit, is that we've started having education sessions specifically about the supports intensity scale and what to expect when you're coming and how we can work together to help prepare individuals for that assessment. And part of that presentation does include sort of the BOA process. Yeah, and the supports budget. So right now we're having a great response with people signing up. We're trying to keep the sessions to be pretty small so that we can have more of a classroom-like setting and be able to ask questions. We had our first dry run last week, and it seemed to go pretty well. We've learned a bit, but we're going to continue on doing that and disseminating that invitation as we learn and go along. So I think we've got another one in January that folks are welcome to sign up, whether you're a member of an agency, a community service worker, a teacher, whomever, and we're also looking to extend that invitation to families in January as well.
So you're opening that up to people who are already being supported?
Yeah. Yeah.
Hi there. So the province so far has been implemented BOA through a number of years with the SIS in its work with his rate. My question is, how much has the province invested so far in the implementation of BOA? And how much does it project to invest annually into the implementation of BOA?
Okay. We're gonna have to tease that question out just a little bit. So the province, so BOA, really the top of money that we have spent, I'm not sure how to come at this. So our budget grows by about $20 million annually, and government has continued to give us that $20 million annually over the last couple of years. Chris would probably cringe at my rounding up. It's a little bit lower than that. It's about 17, I think. Within that budget, we have spent some money on this project specifically. The two biggest pieces are AIUD, which is about $100,000 annually. Every 2 years, 100,000 every 2
About
years.
$60,000 a year.
Okay, $60,000 a year. And then Human Services Research Institute, which is a separate component, and roughly?
We currently have a contract with Human Services Research Institute for $150,000 Canadian.
Right, and that's about the same as our other contracts, so
that's
we
annually?
probably, no,
No, that's a 1 year.
It's 1 year, and the last one was 18 months, and it was about the same size. And so those have been the over and above our regular business. Those have been the incremental costs.
And the SIS staff,
Fair enough.
it's around 10 staff, is it projected to be total?
Oh, yeah? Yeah, that's about what we have.
But that's a separate line for,
So those were, yeah, so our salary positions that have been allocated to this have just come from other places within our system. So they weren't new to our division, they've come from within our division.
thank you.
Howdy, I have another quick BOA question. There's a bit of a perception out there floating around that one of the effects, not necessarily intentional, but one of the possible effects of BOA would be to result in the increase in community residence size. So the question is there an intentional move to open larger community residences under BOA? There has been a lot of progress made reducing residence size over the last few decades. And the question is, a lot of people are kind of wondering if there's a move to go in the other direction, recognize economies of scale, et cetera. And some people are quite worried about this because the consequences of going backwards would be considerable for some individuals. So can somebody speak to whether that's an intentional move?
So you're talking congregate living, and we haven't really got there, but nor have we had, I can promise, any intentional conversations around that. And I think early work on our funding models really does look at pretty much, well, there are economies of scale that come along from that, and they're in our models now, I think. But no, there's no conversation about intentionally growing the size of the community residence. Not only for the obvious reasons you're talking about, but we're gonna be hard pressed on zoning and some of that other stuff if we're gonna try and do that, so.
Okay, thank you. I have more questions, but they're on other subjects, and I'll leave them for later. Thank you.
Okay.
I think we'll just pause for a moment. I see that Deputy Minister Jay Rogers just arrived. And so maybe we'll ask him if he wants to come up right away. I don't know if he's got a few words that he wants to say before we continue with our questions.
Why don't we let Jay get settled? He'll work his way up and we'll take a couple more questions. Is that all right?
Sure.
Okay.
My question is related to BOA as well. Are there plans to evaluate the rollout of BOA with the new entrants before rolling out with existing people that are receiving services?
You can all jump in on this one if I don't do this right. But essentially, I mean, part of the reason that we've chosen the approach that we've chosen is to try and do something rather incrementally and see if it's working for us or not, and working for everybody. And so in doing that, there have been some evaluation as we've gone along. The bigger challenge will become really when we roll it out to existing. But I think we are learning from the new to services, the new people coming in, living at home with family, new to still, we're learning of some of the questions agencies have, we're adjusting and adapting so that we're able to incorporate that now prior to rolling it out to the existing caseload.
I could just add a bit to that too, because when you speak to participants and families, we're introducing components to the conversation that we never have before, in terms of like a lot of transparency around a support budget. And, you know, this is what the amount you can utilize for respite, and you know, seeing how families and individuals react to that has been really part of the evaluation over the last 2 years, and it's been very positive so far, and doing a more, I guess, thoughtful job as a program about engaging with new entrants and families in a really more consistent way over the last 2 years has gone really well. So anecdotally has gone well. We've had some surveys that we've utilized that have been positive, not an overwhelming number, but that's been part of our evaluation so far, and will be used going forward. So that's the plan.
And what kind of criteria are you looking at when you're evaluating, for instance, in the surveys or?
Yeah, so the survey is some qualitative questions about participants and families' impression of the meeting that they have with me in their CSW to review the results of the SIS interview and use that as a piece to integrate into overall person-centered planning. And how does that feel? How does the SIS interview itself feel? Whether the family and individual is able to plan within the support budget that we're presenting, whether or not that's sufficient. And those are kind of like our really basic measures of success, I guess. Like Michelle stated, we're really trying to figure that part out as we go, and that's why it's been, I think, a positive step to take this approach and figure out those things.
Would the plan for evaluation include gathering input from the agencies to make sure that the way you evaluate how it's going also involves our input and the individuals supported?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Hi, my question has to do with the system itself, and from hearing about it and reading about it, there's a lot of investment in SIS, and there's a lot of work done on that, and there's a lot of investment on the levels. But what I can't identify clearly are any desired outcomes for the system. There's very little written about that, and it's talked about being a person-centered approach. So I'm looking for reading for what are going to be the outcomes for individuals. And then the second question, part of that is, what's the capacity? How is there capacity being built to create those outcomes? I don't see a whole lot on that end of it. And I guess my question is, what are the safeguards that supported independent living doesn't turn into supported isolated living? And what are the safeguards that fostering and home sharing don't suffer from the same vulnerabilities that they suffered for historically?
So I'll start, and thanks for that. So I mean, our primary outcome is, we want improved outcomes for Manitobans and the citizens we're serving. That's primarily what we're all here driving towards. We want to bring fairness and equity and transparency in how we do that, and we want to give them, we want to shift from a system-focused program to a system that puts really much more choice and control in the hands of individuals and families as they plan with their supports budget, and they do their planning with what they're going to do with funded supports. So those are some of our primary pieces around this, and I do think that as we move forward and are transparent about here's the budget you have to work with, people are finding that they have more autonomy and control over that, as opposed to the language of feeling kind of like they belong to a service provider or the like. So I think this puts more citizen control at the front of our program. We will have some pretty clear outcome measures that deal with things like fairness and transparency and those pieces. We want to work with you on quality outcome indicators for individuals and making sure that what we are doing together is giving people good quality of life outcomes, and so we are working on a framework for that together with abilities. And really then we need to, I don't know, we've developed an outcomes framework. I don't know that we've shared that. It's shareable.
Can I just say
yeah.
That's way too global for it. In a system, there has to be a balance. You've got a heavy investment in SIS. You've got a heavy investment in the levels, and obviously you've invested a lot in that, spent a lot of time. and the global outcome you give me is improving the lives of people, that's not sufficient, I don't think.
No, I don't disagree. I think we have never in our programs done a good job of outcome measurement for the citizens we're serving. And you know, we haven't had it here in CLDS, we don't have it now. So we are building it from new as a piece of this. We don't have good outcome measures now in which to baseline much of this against. So we need to, as a system, decide that this is an investment we want to make, and so we are doing that.
And I'll just end with saying, in terms of system reform, this is not the time to raise the question of we're going to do this. The question where this should have been resolved was at the start. The stakeholders would be involved, if we are going to be involved, about what they are. I don't think you develop the outcomes after you've developed the funding model. So
we are in partnership with you on doing that, just so you know. Abilities and Government is in partnership working on the quality of life and outcome indicators.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for being here today. We know that there's other jurisdictions that have they've begun to discontinue using the supports intensity scale. Certainly in Canada, Alberta has stopped, as well as in some of the states, and I think one of the ones that most recently did was New Mexico. After a lawsuit there, they decided to discontinue using it. And it is the view of some that the use of a standardized assessment tool, such as the SIS, to determine eligibility to access services is beyond the scope of that tools. And it shouldn't be used to determine eligibility or access to services. So our concern is about the people who may choose to not go through this process and what will happen to them. Some of the questions that are coming out is, would that form the basis of a human rights complaint? And if that doesn't, can they rely on the Vulnerable Persons Act? Do you believe that the VPA has adequate safeguards for all of the people who are coming into the system? It's not a yes or no question either.
No, it's really not, Jen. That's a great question. So do you want to start with this one, Craig, or do you want me to go with this?
You can go with it.
I've just done all the talking. Okay, so just so everyone in the room is on the same starting place, SIS does not determine eligibility for this program, right? It has no role in that at all. That is a separate process. Once you are in this program, then we need a methodology for determining what level of funded supports we are going to provide, and to do that in a fair and equitable way. And that's where the supports intensity scale comes in. And so it's not about eligibility.
Or access to service. So if someone chooses not to go through the process, what happens to them?
In order to access funded supports, you do need to participate in the supports intensity scale.
So in a sense, it
is not
eligibility to.
Well,
it's not eligibility for the program, but what's
right. So the
difference?
VPA is there independent of that, right? A vulnerable person is a vulnerable person independent of the supports intensity scale.
Assumed to have the capacity to make decisions for themselves unless proven otherwise.
Right, absolutely. But still, the legislation, we still have a protection mandate within that, right? So that's there. But SIS is a mechanism for us to determine the level of funded supports and people's support needs. And you know, many of the jurisdictions that started using SIS did so independent of funding models. This was a conversation about what, as opposed to so many eligibility questions, which are about what can't someone do to get into a program, SIS was an attempt to turn that on its head a bit and have a conversation about what do you need in order to be able to do something, to be successful. And so this is an attempt to do that, and then for us to align this level of services and supports that we provide with that. I know,
that.
And I appreciate that there are people that, independent of which tool we use, they would object to any standardized assessment. Right, it's not necessary, some of it's SIS specific, Some of it's much broader.
Right, but I think that part of it is the process itself, that people have said, like, how can you determine my support needs if I haven't been if I haven't done a plan? If I don't know what I'm hoping my life, so it seems like the person-centered planning comes at the end when it really should be much closer to the beginning.
That's a very good point, and one that I've heard broadly. You know, it's a very good point, and I think I've got a million different things. I've been listening to what you've been saying too in your question. I think one of the things that we have to be aware of too is that the supports intensity scale is a way of gathering information. So how it's applied and how it's used is dependent on the individual, their support network, and then partners, whether it's an agency or government. So within that context, we could, there's no rule to say that we can't do that planning before doing an assessment, right? And in fact, I encourage an individual and their support network to talk about what's important to them and what's important for them, so that when we have that, or when we have a referral sent to one of our facilitators, is that we have a sense of that going in, so that we can kind of use that as a driving mechanism to get through the assessment, and then we can focus that support and have a much better result. So I'm in full support of, like, it doesn't have to be A, B, C, right? It could be whichever way. Now, once we determine, we get through the assessment, then that's when the budget piece comes in, and you'll probably need to use that budget to determine how you're going to achieve those goals, no matter when that discussion happened. So it doesn't have to even be one planning meeting. It could be a planning meeting or a vision meeting. It could be the assessment and then another planning meeting. It's all whatever works for the individual.
I think it still is this overall process issue as well too, in that it seems that, you know, when there's a lot of work done around person-centered planning, and it is one of the most successful approaches to supporting people to be fully included in their community. And the ownership of that process belongs to the person in their network, where this feels like this process belongs to government. And I think that there's a big difference there. And I know there's lots of people behind me, but the last point I want to make is about the quality assurances, and I'm thrilled that your funding abilities to be able to engage Leanne. The accreditation that the St. Amand Community Residential Program has gone through with the Council on Quality and Leadership is very much a scientific approach. There's a lot of science behind it. It's credible. It had an excellent process for gathering information from people. It had a process that gathered information from people about what was important to them and how they defined their outcomes. And that was really that was the beginning of support plans that were put in place for people. I think if we would have invested a lot more money in developing that process here in the province, as we tried to 15 years or so ago, we would be in a much different place right now in terms of how people are experiencing life. And I would say that we are moving in a direction where it is not going to be about people having the experience of living as equal citizens. I think we're on a very rapid decline in what the quality of life is going to be for people. And I was talking to somebody in this room the other day who said this is not like a gentle slide back, it's like falling off a cliff. And I think that's what it's feeling like out there.
So Jenna, what's that about? Like, is that the perception because of SIS?
I think it's sort of a global perception that something is really changing. There's, there may be transparency once you get to the window, but there's a lot of people that are saying, what does this mean for us? And, families who say, okay, our only option for our son or daughter to move is to, if they can live semi-independently, that might be one thing, but, or a home share. And they're saying, we're not looking for other families to take care of our son or daughter and to create a home for them. We really want to be part of celebrating that they're adults, that they have a life to live of their own, and they want to be able to provide some of those natural supports. And I think that we all would agree that having more people in greater networks are going to be good for people. But there are a lot of people out there who do not have family. Right. And as you move into doing the assessment with people who are in the system and have been for a number of years, you're going to find that there are people who are not known. There will be hardly anybody in their life who will know much about them before the year or so before that, with the rapid turnover of staff. And I think we're going to have a multi-tiered system for people. So some people are going to have good quality of lives because their family and their support network have the resources to be able to fill in some of those pieces. And we're going to have people that are living in despair.
Is there something we're doing now that you think exacerbates that? Because that exists now, I would suggest. And I think what we're bringing to that might mitigate that to a degree, not exacerbate that.
Yeah, it might.
Okay.
It doesn't feel like that, but it might.
Okay.
So,
okay. Well, no.
So I do hope that there's good evaluation of this process,
so
and no hesitation that no matter how much has been invested, that if you say this is not getting us where we need to, is to not continue down that path. And I know that there has been consultations and meetings and with community. It doesn't necessarily feel like that to some families, that there has been any consultation.
I know, and I don't want to pretend that it's actually been enough. I think particularly for families that are in the system and even agencies, I think there's that piece around, you know, especially for families, they fought for everything that they've got right now set up, at least for those that have got. And there's a fear of what's going to happen, and that makes sense. I mean, that, you know, we need to normalize that. And our ability to be out there and in front and talking to people to the degree we'd like to have been hasn't quite been there. We will continue to try and make sure that more and more of those forums are there though now.
Okay, thank you.
You're up, Sid.
Hi. I'm going to try not to cover a lot of things, good things that have already been said, but I'd like to just make a few comments. There's a couple of things that I've heard in the last year or so that I find troubling. This is an enormous undertaking that you're embarked on, and it involves people who really rely on us and you and a whole bunch of people. And I found if I ask a question that gets into the planning just a little bit, the answer is we're not there yet. And I think that's not a legitimate way to plan something like this. I think those kinds of questions have to be answered. It's similar to what Bob said, in the front, not as you go through. It's not like you're kind of feeling your way, or it feels like you are and it shouldn't be. The other thing I'd like to comment on is the notion as fairness and equitability being a goal of the system. Obviously, you want to do things in a fair and equitable way, but the goal of the system should be getting at quality measures. You know, somebody raised the notion of whether or not the system is going to start increasing community congregate care, and it is congregate care to group homes, from the typical of 3 and 4 now. I mean, everyone in the room would know my bias. The answer should be no. The standards say you can't do that, because if you've ever been in both, you know that that's not quality. You know that that's horrible service for folks. So I guess my main plea here is take half a step back. Figure out where you want to go. Figure out what the quality measures will be. Janet talked about quality assurance. Great thing. Against what? You know, it just seems to me that this is too big and too important to feel your way through. Thanks.
Yeah, so, you know, we have had that conversation a couple times. We chose between one of two approaches when we decided to embark on this. There was two ways to have gone. We could have done significant planning and kind of pulled the switch, or we could have done a bit of this incremental cohort kind of model that we've come along to use. And there were pros and cons to both. And absolutely, what it means is we've chosen an approach where we don't have as many of the answers for some of the next stages as I think some of you are looking for, particularly when it comes to our existing. I think principally we can answer a number of those questions, but how that plays out exactly for you and your agency, not there yet. And I know that that's been frustrating. And yeah, I don't, you got one? No.
Yeah, so not entirely sure what you mean by feeling your way through. I know that having had the experience of leading major system changes in the past, that when you do that, you have to learn as you go, and you have to be able to be flexible and adapt based on implementation and what you learn. Should you have a clear plan at the outset? Yes. Are you going to have to learn to do things differently as it gets implemented? For sure.
I don't want to debate it, Jay, and I agree with what you said, but I think at least you need to know what you think is going to be good, because that's what you're aiming for. If you haven't figured out what you think will be good enough service, I'm not sure how to even feel your way to it. So maybe it's a fine line. It seems important to me.
Technically, you could come back to the mic once you step down. That doesn't seem fair.
Only stands. So my question is around housing. I'm more expressing a concern about housing, and if the panel is able to respond to that concern, that would be great. So my concern is this: the agencies tend to want to own the housing that they have, and there's a good reason for that. It offers something predictable. It allows us to address homelessness. It allows people to age in place. It has all sorts of benefits when an agency owns that property. But what we're seeing is an alarming trend in the province to divest themselves of publicly owned property into the private sector. So I don't know if you can address that or if you share that concern, but I'll let anyone who on the panel wants to speak to that. Yeah.
While I'm on the board of MHRC, I'll give this to our chair.
I think that, I'll come at it a couple different ways. I think that in the Department of Families being so wide in scope, it's really a tremendous opportunity to have housing as part of that. And Michelle referred to the Board of Directors, and we've had a number of really good conversations with the Board of Directors on how we can move forward with the corporation in a way that is more directly supportive of the programs within the department, like CLDS and child welfare and kids transitioning from care and those kinds of things. So I think that's a tremendous opportunity that's been created by creating this somewhat massive department, social services department. As a direction going forward, you mentioned divesting to private sector.
Well, divesting of property that you have in public holdings.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in working with municipalities and not-for-profits, in particular on local housing solutions. That is a direction we've signaled we're going as a corporation. We've got some things going on right now with a couple of municipalities. It is a direction that will be, I can say with some confidence, coming out from the National Housing Strategy. The feds intend to, by the looks of things, make a substantial pot of money available directly to municipalities and providers. So over the next number of years, you will see the corporation moving to empowering communities and municipalities for more local solutions. But we need to do that in a way to make sure that we're not losing any affordable housing units. So that creates a different role for us. At the same time, we know, and this was referred to in the KPMG report, I don't know if it's come up yet. Okay, forget I said that. Referred to in this report. And what they refer to as a hybrid model. And that hybrid model is a combination of moving assets to more local control, but at the same time articulating what is the ongoing social role of housing for those higher need individuals. And that's the social purpose of social housing that we're talking about, that creates the opportunities for supporting vulnerable populations already served by this department.
Right, and that is a great goal, a lofty goal. I would suggest that by keeping that stock.
I've forgotten my question. I have a question that has to do with wages for.
Allows you to deliver on that commitment.
Which is the core of being able to provide any kind of quality service. So I'm from a residential service agency. We benefited from the wage enhancement initiative, which has now plateaued at $13.75 an hour. And if we somehow had money to raise wages over $13.75, we would lose the difference between the $12.06 and the $13.75. I understand an average in BOA will be $15 an hour, and by the time that rolls out for people in current services residentially, that amount won't mean anything. Is there any plan to inject some funding into services now so that we can pay people decently and reach whatever the target is by the time the BOA rolls out for people who are already receiving service?
Wow. Straight up, we don't intend to expand on the wage enhancement fund because it's a very cumbersome and problematic initiative.
I would agree.
And
it's the most ridiculous way we've ever received
I
funding.
don't disagree. So, no attention. And you're right, we have been pegging the average wage at 15. I don't agree that by the time we roll it out, it will be meaningless. We really aren't that far off from hitting residential services. I think our timeline is about a year out from now, so it's not that far off. And hopefully we can make things like wage enhancement fund through that process a little bit obsolete. You know, we recognize the sector hasn't had an increase for a while, but BOA's right now is our approach. Yeah.
So the benefits, any benefit to recruitment and retention is now gone, and we'll go into another year saying everybody gets $13.75.
There is no expansion to wage enhancement fund. We do plan to target $15 an hour, and we will, you know, continue to see if we can find resources to do anything else in between BOA and them.
Maybe a different set of staff by then.
And following right up on that point, turnover rates are huge and increasing, and we're also finding we're just finding a heck of a time recruiting people. And then when we train them all up, which also costs a lot of money, they get picked off by other sectors, mostly education, health, justice, pick off our staff. So turnover rates in a conservative estimate is $9,000 per person, the turnover rate costs to bring in a new person, hire trained staff. It's a huge amount of money that we're throwing out the window on turnover. We also, as we have more casual staff coming in to replace workers, either because that's who we can recruit, but also because we have a lot of staff on leave whom we cannot replace. So we have more casual staff coming in. Casual staff then are not as trained, not as skilled, not as committed, don't know their way around. So the regular staff that they meet tend to have to overdo to catch up for the casual staff. So then it just continues. So I would really, I mean, $15 an hour, if that's going to be like the take-home amount staff are going to have, that would be an improvement if we start there. But I guess I just want to look at the whole sector has been, like there's a worry some of us have had that you guys think we're sitting on a lot of money. And we want to really put that to rest, that we're not sitting on a lot of money or any money, and that it's really hard to attract staff. And now with the move, as much as you can, to move people to least amount of support that they can have and live good independent lives. So you're moving away from group care, out of institutions into group care, and then moving down. We have more people who are living quite independently in the community. We need staffing to support that, and those staff have to be good staff and they have to be supported staff and they have to stay put and be committed to those folks, because the turnover rates and the violence rates, the WCB rates, the insurance and disability, the rest of it is going to bankrupt us all pretty soon.
No, we're painfully aware, even in our own DSW work, for sure. And I mean, our hope is that by getting that average 15 up, we can have an impact on some of those turnover rates. I don't know if that will translate or not.
Another scary feature of that is to not just look at the front line, because you're going to have wage compression. You can't have supervisor. It goes the whole way. So if you start to just, if you only say you have, like you're going to cut out between me and the line staff, there is no new directions.
Thanks, Jennifer.
I'm going to take things in a different direction. So some of the quickest scoring agencies that we're seeing are in the field of for-profit. For example, Brandon Support Services, right? So can you explain why government is asking for-profits to support individuals over the not-for-profits? What are they doing? Are they providing services we're not providing, outcomes we're not providing? Why are we seeing this trend?
So generally our approach has been, we've only really had Brandon Support Services outside of Winnipeg. We didn't really have a for-profit provider in Winnipeg until Brandon Support Services started expanding into Winnipeg. And our approach as a program has largely been to go to the not-for-profit sector first, and then to Brandon, then to our for-profit provider. Generally, they have accepted more complex clients and been willing to work with a more complex client group, has been my understanding of our experience. Now you're smiling, so you may have a different understanding.
Well, John's waiting when you back there. Sometimes I have a question around why and outcomes. So there's sometimes a reason, and it's not coming from an organization that we do accept complex clients, but we accept them with a clear, we need X, Y, and Z for resources, and we've been told, no, we won't give you X, Y, and Z, and then we turn around and find out that this individual has gone to another organization. That makes me go, okay, well, again, what are they promising, what are they doing, and what is their quality of care? I've seen pictures pre and post of individuals who have left our care and gone to other organizations that are maybe not in the same basis, and I'll be honest, we're scared for the individuals when we see kind of a decline. Aside from that, can you tell me what the profit margins are that you're approving when you're doing contracts with for-profit?
It's very specific. Chris, do you know? Or Sherry?
Pass it down to you.
Currently, we only, in the province, only have 3 to 4 for-profit agencies. My understanding is that not-for-profit is the first individual agency that we will go to, and then if there's not enough of the not-for-profit agencies, then for-profit is seeked.
But again, we're offering to open homes, and we're being told no, and then we find out Brandon Support Services got approved to open a home. So there's a bit of a mixed message there, just so you know.
Right, and I'm not aware as to the circumstances in the past as to why that would have occurred, etc. Obviously, there would have been a rationale justification as to the requirement at that particular time. With regards to the for-profit service purchase agreements, it is evolved around rate on investment, the ROI, and currently that is being debated, it's being looked at, it's being analyzed. Because we have to move forward with developing a new for-profit service purchase agreement. So it's under being...
and at the discovery session, you said that that would be made available to us, correct?
Right, once that's been developed, it's still under development stage as to, it's not even with our legal services department as yet, that particular for-profit agreement. So it's still being put together.
Are you, when you look at those rates, that percentage, that profit margin, are you including or tracking or monitoring the impact of unfilled shifts on their profit margin?
I couldn't speak to that. That would be more of a program-related question on outcomes and what's being looked at.
I'm just more on the agreement side. So I'm not sure if someone else is available to speak to the
Because there's
analysis
potential for
completed.
huge profit if you underfill your shifts.
So I'll answer that question.
I mean, I'm not sitting there going through their profit schedules or whatever, but I know that we have an existing schedule right now that allows you your rate of return on investment and the like, and the more clients you take, I think it caps out or something, but I'm not sure what those numbers are. Yes, if you were to unfill shifts, but then I don't have just a concern with your profit, I have a concern with your service. Same thing as if you don't fill shifts. And we have those conversations with any agency, for profit or not. We get that, one, we're funding you below what your staffing costs actually are, and we get that you're gonna manage that within turnover, and you're gonna do some of that. But if you're pulling out a profit, we're having a conversation with you too on not filling shifts, just like we would with BSS or anybody else.
Okay, so last point, and then I'll sit down. In general, even outside of our field, there does tend to be this appearance of a shift towards privatization, investing capital in for-profit. Is this a sign of things to come for our field?
I think right now it's fair to say that we are looking at how we deliver services and being challenged to look at how we deliver services. There's no one asking us to privatize our services, but we are being asked to look at our service models. We have huge wait lists in many of our programs for services. EIA excluded, but CLDS, I got staff sitting there with wait lists, people waiting for case manager assignments, same with children's disabilities, same with Vogue Rehab. We are being challenged to look at our service models and our models for delivery in order to see if we can better meet the needs of the citizens. And so, I mean, that's what we're doing. I don't know if you have a different answer.
I don't have a different answer at all. I echo Michelle's comments that at this point haven't been asked to look at what further privatization might look like in this field. We're more interested in doing what we can to build the capacity and the influence and the partnership with the not-for-profit sector. I think we've signaled that in the last little while for sure, that's where our priorities are right now. I can't say with 100% certainty we might not be asked at some point to consider different ways we might deliver the service, but at this point we haven't been asked that.
So at this point, just to confirm, your priority is to just increase capacity, relationship building, centers of excellence within the existing structure?
Yes.
Thank you.
So I don't have a question. I actually opened up a fortune cookie for you, Jay, and it says, you will bring sunshine into someone's life. So, no, in all seriousness, thank you for coming today. There was, prior to you coming, we met this morning, and there was a connection made that you and Michelle came to the Government Relations Committee in September, where we talked about that there are some issues of concern within the sector as a whole, and this would be a great format to do that. So thank you for the courage to come and do this today. I wouldn't mind, Jay, if you could, that day in the meeting, you kind of talked a little bit about, in this sector, there is a lot of concern given the large amount of unknowns that have already been kind of talked about today, right? You're kind of feeling your way along. Well, if you're one of our agencies...
I agree to that, by the way, but okay.
Yeah, no, sorry, I didn't mean to put words in your mouth. And so that for us, we don't have all the answers of how the change is going to impact us. So some of us, our boards, our families are concerned that this new level will all of a sudden one day change and they will be asked to move out of their home, or our agency will be destabilized to such a point that we won't be able to operate in the same way. So I think that day you were able to kind of reassure those in the room, the small number of us in the Government Relations Committee, and so I wouldn't mind if you could just kind of, I think that was part of the purpose for having you here today, so I'm just trying to make that connection.
I will give you the mic in a second.
Let you bring the sunshine in the room.
I will let you bring your sunshine in one sec. So or add to this. I think we just want to say that, you know, and back to somebody's comment earlier, is this a partnership or not? I mean, absolutely, we are invested in making some changes. I know we haven't answered all of those. I think what we can say that we're committed to doing is that there won't be a switch that we pull that comes out overnight and is gonna have this massive impact. We will talk about principles about rolling this out to existing clients. It will come to existing clients. But there needs to be some principles around that we haven't developed yet, that we will develop in partnership, that we will talk about approaches. One of the things that was asked at that meeting was, would we take a look at right-sizing cost centers first, as opposed, you know, and moving the funding around appropriately, because right now, you know, we're paying Johnny a whole lot, but not a lot for somebody else in that same home, and that isn't really how the funding isn't aligned by person properly. And so we can talk about doing all of those things. At the end of the day, we are only successful if you are successful. And so we do need this to work for you as much as us. We don't need to, we can't destabilize the sector, and we are very committed to making sure that you are healthy and viable organizations in order to support this. That doesn't mean that there isn't going to need to be change or that money won't move around, but we will work with you on that. Jay?
So a couple of things that I'd like to comment on, and John, I'll get to your point in a minute. There's a question earlier about you know, the investment made in SIS and trying to bring some consistency and fairness to the funding model, and always paying attention to whether what we're doing is improving the quality of lives for the individuals that we serve. And at the end of the day, that's what really matters. And if that's not happening, we of course will revisit what we're doing to see if something that we're doing is having an impact on that. That's why we're so heavily engaged and invested in developing the quality assurance stuff, because that will tell us whether we're having the desired outcomes, we hope. And if it means we have to take a step back and maybe do things differently, we'll do that. I think the point I made at the Government Relations Committee was related to following up on Michelle's comments about you know, money will move and things like that. We know that, but we're going to do it in a very cautious, planned way. And we have no interest in flipping the light switch on at a point in time without knowing what the impacts will be. And we have no interest in destabilizing agencies or putting any of our folks at risk as a result of doing that. So we'll work with you to do this in the most planned way, least disruptive way possible.
That was sunshine. Yeah.
Thank you, Sunshine.
Well, you can keep bringing sunshine. I want to talk about wages. I think I have a couple comments, and then I'll ask a couple questions. But I'm standing here, I'm not usually nervous in talking about anything, you know, and I'm standing here thinking, why am I feeling the way that I'm feeling about this? Why do I feel like I'm gonna cry? Honestly, I think that it frustrates me to death that I am paying, I have 150 staff, that not any of us in this room could do what we are here to do, you know, without our frontline staff. Every single one of those employees at Windsurf brings home $13.75 an hour. And I think that you need to really stop and think about, what does that actually mean? What would it actually mean to you and to me, because I make more than $13.75 an hour, you know, what would it actually mean to me and my family if that was what my paycheck was? If I worked hard all day doing work that's integral to our communities and to the safety of our most vulnerable adults, and
I could not buy groceries for my family. I could not own a vehicle. I need to work multiple jobs, which then has impacts on my relationships with my kids and my spouse and my families. Like, we are so flippant. We are so flippant about this wage issue, and I'm tired of it. I'm so tired of it. So I think my question is, I feel that we do not value, the government, our funding does not value the people that we serve and our employees, who we could not do this work without, because there is no plan that I hear from you to address the wage issue. I understand you can't get millions of dollars tomorrow. I get that. I think I want to know, do you care? Are you talking about it within government? What are you doing about it?
I can't give you an answer that's probably going to be real satisfying, but I can tell you that before I came into this job 14 months ago, I would have been standing there probably making many of the same arguments that you just did. Care deeply about this issue, talking lots about it in government. And it's not just this sector where this is a major issue. I mean, I came from Marymount in the residential care sector where...
What are the wages there?
Comparable.
$13.75. And I know, Michelle, sorry, when you make the argument that you experience some of the same challenges with the direct support workers at the province employees, you pay them more. So I get, yes, there are similar challenges, but really think about $13.75 an hour. Sorry, Jay.
I'm just, I think that's all I wanted to say.
So I have a follow-up question, because I understand and I appreciate that through the Building on Abilities modeling, that you are working towards an increased wage. So my question is, I believe the principles for BOA, I've got them written on my hand, I think. It's our fairness, transparency, equity, and person-centered planning, and a few other ones. How are you taking into consideration these principles in your planning for the rollout of BOA residentially? Because if you are rolling out an increased wage to Windsurf, but not to Shalom, and not to SIL services or day services, that's going to create a lack of fairness and a lack of equity. So how are you thinking about that and planning for that?
So that is a part of the cornerstone of what we're doing, right? I mean, we want the same funding model for every agency. So right now, that's not what we have. So $15 an hour would be equitably applied across all of our agencies, which I think brings a fair degree of transparency and equity to funding. And then what we also end up doing then is making sure that the people we're here to support also have an opportunity to then look at the services available in the agencies that provide those services and look at which best aligns for them, and there's fairness in how we determine their supports budget to go looking for those services. So I think that's the answer. The challenge is we're not there yet, and your pain is real today, and we have heard, Melinda, and we do care. And I do agree, our pressure is a little bit different. And like she says, we talk. Then I'll get down, Michelle. But the only way that I can think, and maybe you have other ideas, but the only way that I can think that you can maintain fairness and equity within the system as you roll out BOA to existing, is with an upfront injection in cash, and an adjustment of wages up front. And I don't know if that is part of your planning process.
Because otherwise, or you're gonna flip a switch, you know, and change all of our funding, which I've heard you say you don't wanna do that either. But if you're phasing in BOA to existing, then you're going to create, for a time period, and residential is complicated, so it'll be a while, for a time period, you're going to create inequities.
That inequity exists today.
Which is a problem.
It exists hugely today.
It's still a problem today.
So,
I hate wage enhancement fund, but it has leveled some of that inequity. It has created other challenges.
It has, and it raised the bottom, and I get all of that.
You know,
yes, yes,
so
absolutely.
I just want you to say, can I tell you the answer?
Yeah, sure.
Can you say
Repeat it, but you can sure try and slip.
I want you to say that you were going to consider looking at how to increase wages before the rollout of BOA to existing. I don't know if you can say that. I'm not asking you to commit to it, I'm asking you to think about it and recognize that it's a challenge.
It's absolutely a challenge, and do we think and talk about it? Yes, I can tell you we think and talk about it. I can't go further than that
Thank you.
right now.
Thank you.
So I have a binder of questions, but I am not allowed to speak that long. Thank you very much for coming today. I know it takes a certain amount of courage to face questions that you may or may not know are coming, but I know some of them are the same ones that we've been asking for many years, and so then there's also the challenge of how do you keep answering the same questions over and over again, not satisfying our desire for the right answer. Service purchase agreements, switching from wages, although that is a noble topic to discuss. With the changes in language in service purchase agreements, it has put a lot of our member agencies, perhaps even all of our member agencies, on eggshells. We are concerned about the future. One of the additions to the service purchase agreement has been around capital assets and real estate. And the question I have is it the province's intention to claim ownership of houses and properties owned by agencies?
I know my answer, but I think Sherry may have a more politically correct one. I don't know. We'll see how she answers, and then I may come back at this.
The service purchase agreement, I believe you'll be looking at clause 505 and 506.
50 something, yeah.
Yes. Okay. So my understanding is that the first clause would be surrounding. Let's grab my notes so I'm correct. So this particular, the new clause was 506, right? The addition of this clause regarding the purchase, use, and disposition of any capital cost items. This would be, my understanding is just referencing a one-time purchase. Capital cost was indicating if you had purchased a Hoya lift, pieces like that is what that 506 clause would be looking at. The 505 would be surrounding the land and any buildings, that type of thing. Now, the first one you would be working with program on written approval in 505. In 506, you would be, if it's specified in your schedules or appendices, which is attached to your service purchase agreement, if that was clarified in very good detail, then that's what would be indicated in 506.
Let me try. Thank you. So 505 is the land piece. Are you saying that's new? I don't think it's new. It's been there. It's always been there.
It's 506, which in the discovery session, when we asked what could be included in the schedules, they said everything from a Hoyer lift to a cottage.
Okay, so if it's not in your schedule, first of all,
we don't have them. We don't have a clue what's in the schedules and the appendices.
Okay. You sign your schedules though, so like, yeah, you will know what's in them. So no, our intention is not to own your properties. It's not to own your land and the houses you're building. Doesn't mean we don't want to have some discussion about maybe some equity sharing or something at some point, maybe. But that's not where we are right now. That's not what that means. What it means is those one-time costs that are really big, that are specific to a client largely, is where we understand what that means.
So the intent would be if the client moves, the property would move with
That's
the client.
exactly.
If government doesn't want to own 56 Hoyerless.
I don't want to own 56 Hoyerless, but if client X is moving over here and we can, or we bought some, yeah, then we want that to go with them.
So can you speak more to your comment about sharing equity?
No. No, there's nothing there. There's nothing in your service purchase agreement that requires any of that. That's not what we're looking for.
So one of the concerns that we have is that we do feel like we are periodically blindsided by initiatives. The most recent one being the release of the surplus deficit policy, which has since been rescinded. And our sense that we don't actually trust, if the language is not clear in that service purchase agreement, that it is not your intention to take ownership of our properties and our capital items, then we become suspicious of what your motivation is. And if that language is not clear in the service purchase agreement to protect our assets and our own investments in our organizations, then agencies will not be able to sign those service purchase agreements. So for us, it's a critical piece to have incredibly clear language so that there isn't our worst fear down the road that we're blindsided with another initiative that we just didn't anticipate.
Yeah, fair enough. I think, Sherry, you're still working with civil legal on fully understanding that language and stuff, right? Yeah. So we're doing that.
The rest of the binder will wait.
So I think this is the last question. We had a couple of us waiting for, so thanks to the members, colleagues that also had important questions, but we kind of decided amongst ourselves. We got one more question on a different topic we haven't touched on today. It's been noticed in some recent hospital discharges that one of the protocols they have in place is that if community living residential service is not available, that an institution is an option for discharge. My question is, has there been new entrants into institutions in the province in the last number of years? And where does the province stand on deinstitutionalization?
There is huge pressure on everybody for hospital discharge, there's no doubt. Their language is bed blocking at this point. There's no medical requirement for somebody to be in hospital. In Winnipeg, we have more options. There are some step-down facilities that health has that's able to help us with movement, for sure. But as you know, sometimes getting ready, some of the folks that we work with, getting a community residence available takes some time. So we've used a number of approaches. One of them has been to supply staff inside hospital, and so we have done some of that. We have right now, I think, on hand 4 or 5 referrals for CLDS clients to come out of hospital and into community, and we are looking at institution for at least potentially 2 right now, because getting a community residence ready will take significant time, and making these people ready for community residence may take a bit of time. The answer on institutions, we continue to work with the Human Rights Settlement. We are continuing to move people out and continue to look at prioritizing some moves both out of the state of Montana and MDC. We have increased the use of MDC for some crisis stabilization, for sure, in the last year, but continue soon as someone goes in to start planning for discharge.
Has there been some discussions on providing more resources to community agencies to develop resources, emergency resources, and also looking at all the restrictions in place in opening new resources?
that is where I need Lisa and some of the program folks here to help me more. I don't know, Craig, if you have anything. I'm sorry, I don't know that money has been the barrier so much to us taking people out of hospital right now. That's not our barrier. Our barrier is it takes time to create those resources, have trained staff and all of those pieces in place, and to find agencies that want to work with some of these complex clients.
And working with community agencies to develop resources to assist with hospital discharges or emergencies like that, is that be the discussion?
We do that, absolutely we do that, for sure.
And is there, again, just with deinstitutionalization, has the province looked at developing a plan for those that are still residing in institutions in our province?
So,
other than the human rights complaint.
So St. Amant has its own plan, and we continue to try and support them with actually that plan. And MDC has a number of people on a transition list, and we are working with agencies to plan for those discharges.
Thank you.
Fantastic. So it's 2 o'clock. I'd like to just give everyone on the panel an opportunity if they'd like to give any closing remarks. And you're welcome to pass as well. So we'll start with you, Chris. We should get your mic. Yeah, send the mic down and then we'll just pass it on down the line.
Well, I didn't get much in the way of questions. But I mean, with BOA, and I understand the concerns when it comes to wages and funding and everything else. We've made sure that we've consulted with a number of our partners or agencies, and with the development of new funding models. And as we move forward for the implementation to existing participants, we continue to work with them as well. So as we go towards SIL and our home share models, we're going to begin working with the agencies on how to implement, because it will have an impact on them.
I appreciate the opportunity to join your group today. I see a lot of familiar faces out in the crowd. We've met before. I appreciate you coming into the discovery sessions and also going out and visiting some of the agencies that are doing impeccable work. We are here again. We appreciate all of the questions. They're all good questions. It helps us to work collaboratively together to positive progress and meet the need of the vulnerable population that we serve. So have a good afternoon.
Yes, thank you, everyone. I think, we've talked a little bit about quality outcomes, and at the end of the day, I think we definitely share the same values. Sometimes we don't always talk the same language, and I think it's really important that we do have that there's an understanding, appreciation around the same shared values around people having good quality lives and self-determination, and I think that really grounds the work that we've been doing for the last number of years, and I know we do share that with you.
Hi everyone, thanks again. Some familiar faces from my life as a case manager, but look forward to working with you further as we work more with existing populations. And I know I'm encouraged actually by speaking with some existing individuals and families who have had questions, and they've bounced to me, so we've actually had the opportunity to talk about how some of the changes might apply to them. So I look forward to working with you guys in the future. Thanks.
Thanks everybody for the opportunity to come and have the conversation and keep the dialogue going. What I encourage you to do, particularly when it comes to building on abilities and some of the changes are coming, is just to keep asking the questions, whether it's in this forum or just with staff or your CSW, or email Elaine or agency relations, and ask your questions to make sure that we're at least getting some good information out there where we have the information to share. We're happy to come back. So thank you.
Hello everybody. I didn't get a lot of mic time either, but I think I can also speak for Nolan too when I say that we've really enjoyed working with everybody, and I know it hasn't always been easy feeling our way along. But I also want to encourage people to keep talking with us. If you have questions, to give us a call. If you have concerns, please contact us so that we can figure out what the issue is, so that we can at least improve upon that process. So Also, if you want to learn more, give us a call. You know, we're willing to come out, talk to you and your agencies and your staff, to family, to friends, whomever, just to make sure that we're doing a really good job. So, and develop that partnership even further. Thanks for inviting.
And Jay.
Yeah, so thanks for the invitation to come out. Thanks for all the questions. Appreciate a couple of people that said thanked us for the courage to be here and thanked us for coming. I don't want this to feel like an unusual event.
Yeah.
This is just the way we should be doing our work. This should be something we do a couple of times a year at least. And if it means that we got to come and answer the question we've answered 10 times, well, that's okay. If it means we got to come and say we can't quite answer that, that's okay too. And if we give you an answer that where you would have preferred a different answer, that's what the dialogue's all about. So I don't want this to feel like a special, unusual event. This is just the way we want to work going forward. So thank you.
I'd like to extend my thanks again to all of you. Please join me in thanking our panel today. We will definitely plan another event like this.
I've got one more. Oh, so just want to make sure that if we do this again, there's a rule that when you come to the mic and sit down, you can't get back.
We should have had people introduce themselves too. We've taken some notes. So for everyone, as the panels kind of getting their things, everyone, we're going to take a 10-minute break, and then we're going to have the Disability Issues Office do the presentation on customer service standards. So feel free to get up, stretch, go to the washroom, check messages, grab a coffee, and we'll start in about 10 minutes. Okay? Yeah, I just. Is it like take a bit to get back up? Yeah. If you pause it, yeah. Let's just.
No. I'm not like.
You've got it. I'm sure.
Wanting me to stay for the next portion of this?
You don't have to, but if you could clear off the tables like voting cards and packages that are left. Packages are going to be hard because people are still here. Let's just do voting cards and
Yeah, exactly. I have a few ideas.
I'm doing it. You're gonna hear everything over and over and over again?
I don't know. Like I might actually be part of this. You're going to
adapted presentation. This one actually is a little shorter, but it has much the same information. I just like to talk a little less. And it's the end of the day for most folks.
I just, because I went through it already.
Yeah. So unless it's a work, the only thing that is different is workshops. And that's when, you take a group of people, you assign them and that group kind of workshops, and then they share it with everyone else. I think that's very useful. You're actually doing something rather than just listening. This is listening.
It was good. It was very
we think it's so long now, but each year, as the deadlines get forward, we discover a whole new audience. And it shows surprises, but they haven't heard that much about the ads. They don't know much about the website. And when it comes to actually do something with customer service, it's wow, you're kidding. So I guess
Yes.
How are you? Good, how are you? Oh, that's fine. That's fine. I've already talked to a couple of people who said, is this the same presentation you were at such and such? Yeah. So I expect a lot to think, well, I've been there, heard that.
I don't play as well, and we also know contact
Oh, absolutely. So we spend most of our time doing it. Yeah. So in any organization that wants to start writing out things, they can send them to us at any time. We do reviews, we get feedback. Yes, policies. You got to go on the website. You can kind of look them over. We always tell people, there's a couple of organizations that took them and just pasted them and said we're done. Yeah, so I always explain that the sample courses that you build on, they're just thoughts and ideas. They might not even work for your particular organization, and you might have other things that are more important in terms of any one of those. So they're a building tool as opposed to, here, I've done it for you.
Yeah, exactly. Very good. Yeah. Okay.
I'm doing great. Okay. Did you get my? You were here all day, so I sent you the Premier's title. I'll go with that. The Honorable Brian Pallister, Premier of Manitoba.
That's what I told her already, so I'll double check to make sure.
Okay, you're welcome.
So you're presenting?
Yes, I am. I'm Patricia.
Hi, Patricia. I'm Jeanette.
Yes, Jeanette.
And I'm on the Manitoba Steering Committee.
Oh, great. Okay.
So part of the group that worked hard to get this legislation in place.
The most important group, I think.
Yeah, well, I don't know.
I think so.
We were successful at pulling lots of people together. So.
Yeah. So I think you should be very proud. I'm not sure it would never happen, but I think even though it was a long time coming, you finally made it happen. So that's all good.
Yeah, I think that when we look back, we sort of feel like we're still in it, you know, getting the whole thing implemented. But I'm thinking that once I retire, I'll look back and go, yeah, that was exciting times.
It is so slow. Standards are rolling out slowly. But I think the goal still remains 2023, which might seem forever for some people, and I understand that. But I'm just glad to see things pushing ahead and moving ahead.
Well, and I think that all of the standards have to actually be out by 2020.
Yes.
So
they're reviewing the legislation just to make sure we can do that.
Yeah.
I bet they'll roll the last two together. I don't know. I mean, I'm not government, but I just have that sense because the employment one's just about ready to go. They're working very diligently on the communication information one, which I understand is huge. And I just think after they get through that one, the last two are going to come out very quickly, and at probably the same time. But implementation is still 2023.
Implementation and monitoring. There's that monitoring question, right? So, oops. Is that us talking into hello people?
Yeah, I'm not sure what mic I'm using actually, and I don't know how to move forward or back. Do I use this sort of pink guy?
For this one?
Yeah.
This
one?
Yeah, I think that's the one.
Nope. It's not gonna be. How would I go back? So just the left side? Okay, and do you know what mics I use? Mics was out of the program. I'm not a good stander, but I'll try.
Partly because Carrie was here.
Sorry to interrupt. I just want to know, am I taking this stuff or versus? Okay.
So would you guys come on to this? So disability issues are accessibility standards yeah, and she's the one from the disability issues. I have an electronic version of this. I know that there's a lot of stuff over the customer service, as you can imagine.
Yeah, well, you know, I think it comes just from the legislation, because and it actually says your customer, that idea of customer service, anyone who gets services or goods from your organization. If you're a school, it's your students, it's the public, it's the parents. University, it's the staff, it's the students, it's the parents, it's all that public that comes to your university for events. So, you know, it's wide scope. So
It
the
is
definition.
and sure, we understand that, but still, the language carries a lot.
Yeah. Customers that I had one school that wrote out a plan that eliminated students. It said they don't really consider students customers. So I had to have to say, I come back and say, you know what? Think of customer as really wide ranging, and your prime customer is your students. They're the ones who stay in your service. So anyway, sure, I will send it to you, and I will contact you if you have questions. Okay.
Thanks so much.
Okay, but there was, I think we had enough questions for two time. So Patricia, yes, I don't believe this mouse works. It's been one of those days. Was it working?
I think if I just press left.
Oh, it's the left. Okay. If you have problems, I'll come click for you. Now see, I can't get it. Here you go.
Now I can.
So I'm being finicky this morning. Okay, so what a day, eh? For those of you who are still left from the town hall, well done, way to go, good job. I thought that was a very valuable forum, and we're already looking at planning one for the spring. So I would love to see that happen twice a year. I think that would be really fantastic. So we are going to transition and talk about maximizing our time together, right? We are going to transition. It's my pleasure to introduce Patricia from the Disability Issues Office. So with the Accessibility for Manitobans Act, nonprofits are going to be expected to comply with the customer service standards as of November 2018. So we approached the Disability Issues Office, and Patricia was more than happy to come out. So I will pass it to her. If you're at the back, you might want to move up a bit. It's up to you, but be a little more intimate to be in the same group. And if you're happy where you are, please be happy. All right, Patricia, come on up.
Hello, everyone. I will start by saying I do not have a cold. I'm not infecting anyone. I have allergies, which for some reason, when it's damp and cold and miserable out, so am I. So there you go. I'm sure I'll get through this, but if I have to take a little cough or water break, I will just stop for a second. When I saw everybody leaving, once I was about to start, I thought, oh no. And then so many came up to me and said they'd already heard my presentation and thanked me. So it's nice to know that for many of you, I've met you before. And for those I haven't met before, hello, I'm Patricia Knight. And I'm going to talk today about your responsibilities regarding the customer service standard under the Accessibility for Manitobans Act. And although I am very aware that you are probably more than familiar with some of the things I'm going to talk about off the top, I still would like to go over it in a quick fashion just to make sure we're all on the same page, what the Act is about, and where these standards, and particularly the customer service standard, comes from. So, we just start with accessibilities for Manitobans. Everyone benefits. I think the most notable thing about this particular piece of legislation, it is not called the disability legislation, it is called accessibility. And the whole idea is, yes, making sure accessibility is equitable to everyone, but also to note that what benefits one person or a group of people often benefits everybody. So I think we're all aware of the benefits of automatic doors. If you're in a wheelchair or mobility device or walking with a cane, of course it's an important thing to give you equal access. For me, if I'm carrying books, groceries, or a parent with a stroller, what better than an automatic door? That's the whole concept of accessibility. Benefits more than one person. And we said it wasn't going to work. It's not. All right, so it worked on the experiment. I'm going to do a lot of up and downing here. Okay. All right. So it's just okay. So I call this presentation Moving Forward. The Act has been around for a while, but there's certain things that we are now putting into place, so we're definitely moving forward. I'm going to go over the Act, talk a little bit about the barriers, certainly concentrate on the customer service standard. Then we're open for questions. If there's time, and you guys are still awake after a very long day, I can give you some updates on what's been happening over the last couple of months to show you where organizations prior to you are now at. And there's a bit of a wrap, but again, it all depends on time. Okay. First thing I want you to notice, this is a website dedicated to the Accessibility for Manitobans Act. So, it's one of the few actual websites totally dedicated to a piece of legislation. Everything you ever wanted to know, including the legislation itself, is on this website. It helps you with your plans, it helps you with your policies. It has events, things that are coming up. We talk about our workshops if anyone's interested. It goes through all the different standards and what part they are, where they are in the process. It's a really good website. If you want to know more about the office I'm from, the Disability Issues Office, in all likelihood you're not going to find anything here. So you'd have to go to that website, and it's really not very good. So I always recommend to people to stick to this one. This is really a great website. Okay? So, the Accessibility for Manitobans Act, enacted in 2013. Important to remember, it was an all-party act. That meant it went through the legislature with no objections and was enacted in December 13. The main goals, and you'll hear this phrase over and over and over again, and I'm sure you're very familiar with it, to identify, prevent, and remove barriers to participation. That is the main goal of the Accessibility for Manitobans Act. It gives our society a long-term commitment to achieve significant progress to make Manitoba more inclusive for everyone. When I say long-term commitment, it's a progressive act. It moves over time. Different standards that are added over time. And the ultimate goal is to make Manitoba a more accessible province by 2023. It's important, I know for a lot of people in this room that seems like, oh, it's still so long, it's still a process that has to unfold. For many organizations that are just beginning to understand this and learn this, it sounds like tomorrow. So there's the balance between let's get it done as fast as we can and making sure that those changes are accepted by all the organizations. And now we will be including nonprofits, although I don't really see that much of a problem. But also the public sector, crown corporations, just about every business in Manitoba. So there is a long learning curve here. Okay. So, are we alone in doing this? Is Manitoba so unique that it decided to move ahead? As yet many of you know, no, absolutely not. But we can see we're in the forefront. We're not leading the pack, but we're at the front. So the Americans are way ahead with their Disability Act enacted in 1990. Ontario is ahead, although we're catching up. They had a longer timeline, so our timeline is shorter, so we're actually catching up. Although their legislation came in 2005. The Accessibility Act for Nova Scotia is the third province, and it just brought in its legislation in 2017. And as you all probably know, the Government of Canada is also looking into an Accessibility Act, and that would be for all federal jurisdictions, banks, railways, airlines, that sort of thing. Anything that provincial legislation really has no control over. And again, a question I don't think I have to answer for you guys, but I will say it anyway. Why accessibility legislation? Barriers to accessibility are the daily reality of over 200,000 Manitobans. And I understand that number has to be updated, so there's probably more by this time. 6 million Canadians identify as having a disability, almost 1 in every 5. That is an updated number, I know for sure. Okay? So they do come at a cost, and when we think of that cost of barriers, we all think the cost to the organization, to your organization, to make it more accessible, to make it more equitable. That's not really, that's one of them. That's not really what we're talking about here. We're talking about the cost of people who don't have accessibility. And when it comes down to those businesses or organization that is offering you goods and services, where they will find a loss is that someone cannot enter their establishment. Let's say it's a restaurant. So you have a friend with a disability and there's no access to that restaurant. Or if there is access to the restaurant, it's not configured properly for that particular disability. So, who loses? Well, the person who can't get in for sure. The business, because they've lost a customer. Have they lost one customer? No. They've lost the friends of that person who might, no, well, I say no, I do eat alone sometimes. So I can't say no one eats alone, but usually if you go out for dinner, you take someone with you. It's either your group of friends or your family, so that business has lost more than that one individual. They've lost that entire group of people. It is estimated that people with disabilities, and this is an updated number, 55 billion estimated buying power in Canada. So if you're a business and you look at that potential and you haven't opened your doors or made your place more accessible, you're losing part of that huge fund of money. Okay. I just want to roll back a bit to the Human Rights Code. So I want it to be known, and it's very important, that this is the most important law addressing discrimination in our province. The AMA and the Human Rights Code are connected in that the AMA builds on the requirements of the Human Rights Code. So you're not going to see too many differences in terms of if you have a complaint filed against you and the Human Rights Code investigates and finds that you are in contravention, then you're going to find that it's something we probably told you should have done already. So those kind of things, the difference with the Act is it's more progressive. Human rights is based on a complaint. So we're trying to say we can't avoid complaints, you still might get complaints, but if you have the proper processes and policies in place, it is a lot less likely. And you can always explain to the Human Rights Commission that you have this in place and something might have gone wrong, it'll probably go better for you. The most important thing about the Human Rights Commission is, I don't know how many of you are familiar with it, but the Human Rights Code, there are 13 grounds that you can file a complaint on. That ranges from age to sexual orientation, ancestry, sex, religion. One of those grounds is disability. So 1 out of 13, and yet 40%, and in fact last year I think it was more, over 40% of the complaints are based on disability. 1 in 13 ground, 40% of the complaints. It was interesting when I just came in a little earlier, I was listening to the panel because people think of barriers in different ways. That someone said something about, we don't consider the money a barrier. That's why we have this particular explanation, especially for those groups that think, well, what are you talking about? What is the Act talking about in terms of barriers? And I often get at my workshops, someone said, you know, I ask them to list barriers that they might acknowledge within their own organization. And often I get money. Money is our biggest barrier. And I understand it's a barrier. It's not a barrier in terms of what this Act is trying to say. The barriers are not money. They're not long lineups at a store or at a hospital. They are structural. We all understand structural barriers. That's those staircases. It's a walk-up building with no elevator. We understand those kind of structural barriers. That's a barrier. No one is saying within this Act you have to change those things overnight. In fact, they're saying if you're doing a major renovation, look to the building code. In the meantime, we're going to tell you how to deal with the fact you might have an inaccessible building. What are some of the solutions that don't require building a ramp, getting an elevator? Even it might even not be possible to do that. So that's how we deal with structure. Barriers may affect information and communication. I think that's pretty reasonable to think of. A person who has a hearing impairment has more difficulty communicating with some people than others. So that's a communication. Information is the kind of thing where you stand in line forever and then are handed a form and you're expected to fill it out on the spot, and you might have visual impairment and the font is so tiny you can't even read what they're asking you to fill out, or indeed you might not be able to read it at all. Those are information communication barriers that this Act will address through its standards. Technology. Technology is like that wonderful thing that many of us celebrate and others curse. Touch-tone phones. Touch-tone is a wonderful thing. Touch-tone anything. You go to the airport, touch, touch, touch. It's all fabulous, except again for people perhaps blind or visually impaired, where that isn't going to work for them. So in terms of technology, websites can be a nightmare for many people. They're still done in a very old-fashioned, like we like to think, instead of a more accessible way. So the websites can be part of that technology that create a huge barrier for people. The systemic barriers, which I'm sure you're more than aware of, are those barriers, and it usually stems from a common practice or a policy that you may have that you don't even realize that it's affecting a number of people. So an example that I often use is, let's flip to employment for a second. If there was an employer looking to hire an employee for a specific job, and they decided to put out that ad. First thing wrong is the ad is not accessible to most people. Maybe it's an online, you can only apply online. Some people cannot do online, so automatically they've been eliminated. So first off, you have to think of how your jobs are advertised. Okay, the second systemic problem could be there's a very old-fashioned requirement in many job applications, and we still see them today. So for example, this is a job where you go to an office, you work on a computer, and you have your colleagues and you advise or you take advice from them. But for some reason, in that job ad, it says, must have a valid driver's license. So unless the valid driver's license is really connected to the position, which means you go out, you travel, you're a traveling salesman, you have to go out and do presentations every other day. It's not really a valid requirement, and yet they show up on job applications all the time, and they're not connected to the job itself. That's systemic. So many people don't have a driver's license, and certainly many people with disabilities don't have a driver's license. That's what we call a systemic barrier. And the last one, and I think no surprise to you, was a huge surprise to me when I first started working with people with disabilities, is attitude. That's such a powerful barrier. The fact that people think you can't do something, or they look at you differently. There's an attitudinal problem there, and that usually translates to an assumption about yourself that is based on absolutely nothing. So those are the prime barriers that the Act tries to address. So those accessibility standards. So the Act is there, it kind of describes barriers, it gives you an idea of where it wants to go in the future. It also talks about standards that will be rolled out over time that are part of the Act, but they're actually the regulations associated with the Act. And they're called the building blocks. They come into play over time. So they're targeted at 5 key areas of living, and I'm going to get to that in a minute. The nice thing about standards is that most places with accessibility legislation, in Canada at least, have the same standards. So that if you have a standard in Ontario and you come to Manitoba, you should more or less see the same kind of customer service, for example. So they do build on the same 5 standards. The names might be a little different, but they're very much the same. Our accessibility standards, or what we call them, is customer service. That regulation became law in 2015. The reason you're beginning to hear more and more about it now is the deadlines for compliance with this standard move over time. The public sector was first, and now we're going into the business and nonprofit sector. So although it's been law for a couple of years, this is now when you have to really get serious about it. The employment standard is right around the corner. It's drafted, it's actually on that website I showed you. You can go look at it, give some feedback. The consultation process for that standard has been taking place throughout the year. And so now it's ready to go. It's the final time for you to give any feedback you might have. So it's there. I predict it will be a standard in early 2018. Information communication is the one that is being worked on right now. It's a very complicated one, as you can imagine, but it is certainly well through the process. Transportation and the built environment are the last 2. Transportation will be very sector specific. It depends if you have any kind of transportation associated with your organization. Built environment is the one that confuses people the most. Again, we're not talking about stairs inside buildings and accessible bathrooms. Again, building code. Those are all building code things. When we talk about the built environment, the way it is being framed now, and I'm not saying it's not going to change, but the way it is being framed now is the outside. So it's outside your buildings. It's going to look at parks. It's going to look at parking lots, entranceways. Anything that's outside your building and really out of the scope of the building code is what this Act is going to start asking businesses to address. That's good. Okay, I bring this up because all public sector had to do an accessibility plan. I'm ahead of myself. Okay, who has to comply with the AMA? The legislation applies to all Manitoba organizations, public, private, and nonprofit. So that's where you group come in. It's towards the end of the compliance, but it is now something to seriously start working on. So the idea is to provide goods and services and have 1 or more employees. So if you're so tiny you don't even have any employees, you don't have to worry about this. Although it's always nice if you want to build your company, your organization, or your nonprofit, to still look at them and consider them. We always say it's good practice, even though the law is not compelling you to do so. Public sector must have an accessibility plan as well as comply with the standards. For private and nonprofit, you do not need an accessibility plan, but you do need to comply with the standards. Okay. So this is where I jump to. So the idea of a plan is something that you're not required to do. And yet over and over again, nonprofit organizations especially, some businesses have come to our office and say they want to do one anyway. So why would they want to take on the extra work? Well, there's a couple of reasons. It does give you a planning advantage. It lets you know what's coming up in the future. It also allows you to budget for certain things. It has, its plan is like a strategic plan. You can do what I have to do in the short term, medium term, long term, what are our ultimate goals? So for some organization, that is a real helpful hand when it comes to rolling out this kind of legislation. So many nonprofits are completing plans. In Ontario, everybody had to do a plan. Whether you're a public sector or a private organization, a business, nonprofit, everyone had to do them. So if you have a sister organization, or if you have a business in Manitoba that also has a business in Ontario, in all likelihood, you've already got the makings of a plan from that province. You might have to adapt it a little to make it work for your particular organization here, but the basic plan is already there. So they're just opting into doing a plan because they know it's partially done. A plan requires you to list your successes. Most organizations do have some accessibility. And it's important to be proud of that and know you're not starting from zero. A plan also asks you to identify the barriers in your organization. And then it asks for that strategic plan. How are you going to address these? When are you going to address these? And when I'm talking to people that are doing plans, I always say, put the customer service standard first, because that's the first real deadline you're going to be faced with. So, as I mentioned, we can skip through this one. The customer service standard became law in 2015. It requires that organizations have policies, practices, processes to deliver accessible customer services for persons with disabilities. A couple of things to that. The word customer, I had a conversation just before I spoke to here. What is a customer? Under the law, under this particular law, customer is a very wide-ranging word. Anyone who gets services or goods from what your organization is. So, if you're a school or a school division, your customers include students. I know it's an odd term to think of a student as a customer, but those are all what is considered under the envelope of a customer. So keep that in mind. Also, I want to direct the idea of policies, practices, processes. These are words. Different organizations use different words. Policy, you can do an umbrella policy and then a lot of practice and measures afterwards. The Act doesn't really care. It constantly refers to policies with the understanding that organizations use different words when they're kind of planning things. So don't get too caught up on some of the words you see. Public sector consists of universities, colleges, health authorities, large municipalities, school divisions. They have until 2017, which, you know what, November right now. They should really have complied with the customer service standard by now. The private sector, nonprofit organization, and those smaller municipalities have until November 2018. So you have almost an entire year to start working on this and implementing it in your organization. Your obligation is to identify barriers to accessible customer service, remove those barriers, prevent the creation of new barriers, and provide equivalent customer service. So there are those words. They keep coming back all the time. The idea is to identify, remove, and prevent. One of the things you might do when it comes to systemic, if you already have some practices and measures, one of your first steps might be just review them. Make sure there's nothing buried in there that is actually something that causes a systemic problem. So that's a thought that you could have, and we'll move on. Creating customer service practices and policies. Becoming accessible means developing those practice, policies, measures. Now I'm using a dash, right? Because I don't really care what words you use. On how your organization will improve service to customers with disabilities. And remember, once you do that, you improve it for everybody. Accessibility, not necessarily focused on disability. Remember the principles of independence, dignity, and equal opportunity. From sitting to in the question period, as I came in a little early, I think you guys all get that. The questions to me all sort of in some way or another pertain to that idea of independence and dignity, and indeed equal opportunity. Okay? So, now we've gone through all that. What exactly are these requirements that you are expected to do as an organization, a nonprofit organization? Again, identify and remove barriers. These are what you have to address. Communication information. That was one of the big ones we talked about. At a customer service level, don't worry about throwing out your website and investing tens of thousands of dollars in a new one. But if you do have a computer expert or an IT person, the luxury of an IT person, ask them how to make your existing website more accessible. There are little tricks that can be done. Make sure you offer alternate formats, that sort of thing will just begin to enhance people with disabilities engaging with your organization. The other thing to consider is when people first walk into your organization, how are they greeted? How do they communicate with that first person they meet? We recommend that a simple statement, either said verbally or posted somewhere or both, how can I help? It's called an active offer, which means you have offered help before someone has to ask for it. So that active offer will solve so many of your problems. If they are not sure how to communicate with you because they're hard of hearing or visually impaired, they will explain that to you. If they can't speak the way you might be able to understand them, have a pad and a pen ready. They might want to write something down for you. These are all almost common sense things to think about when you're complying with the customer service standard. How do I communicate? How is our information presented? If you have that little wee font application form or some form that they have to fill out, make sure, you don't have to have a stack of them available, but make sure at least in your computer in a larger font. So if someone says, you know, I'm sorry, I just can't read this. Oh, I'll get you to a larger font. We have it in a 16 font. And you go and you get it the 16 font printed, you hand them a type of sheet they can read. Those are the kind of things you have to think about when you're first greeting your customers in terms of communicating or passing on information. You want that as part of your practice, policies, whatever word you want to use. Assistive devices. Well, the most important thing, and I don't know, I suspect some of you, maybe all of you, have witnessed people that feel a little uncomfortable when there is an assistive device. They don't know how to react. They actually might display even rude behavior. So for example, if I'm standing and I'm blocking a doorway and someone wants me out of the way, the polite thing to do is, you know, to ask me to, could you please move? And I will move. A rude person is just going to push me out of the way because they want to get through. I work with a man in a wheelchair. He says, you have no idea how often people feel they have the right to just move me. So, that's rude. I mean, there's nothing, there's no common sense to that. You would never, well you wouldn't, in a rude behavior, you would push someone out of the doorway. With a wheelchair, and with any assistive device, your practice, your policies, what you should be telling your employees, you don't touch them, you don't move them without their permission. There are certain things to understand about assistive devices, and welcome them. People come in with talking machines, which at first requires someone to wait, and the patience that you have to exhibit because someone is communicating with you in a different way. Make sure your employees understand that this requires patience. Even writing things down, you're not going to move as fast as you normally would. All those are the kind of things you should be looking at in that first requirement. Writing some practice and policies down and making sure your employees understand it. So, support persons, same thing. Support persons, it thinks, yeah, I would always welcome a support person. What does your organization define as a support person? Is it the paid support person that is with that person 24/7? Is it a family, a friend, a mom? You have to decide, all these people are support people, but your policies might reflect differently on them. For example, if you're a business and you've done your business plan and sadly, we don't agree with this, but we understand that it has to happen, a support person is charged an extra fee. Not necessarily the equivalent fee, it might be 1/3 of the price of a seat or half the price of a seat to accompany the person they're with. Does that also apply to mom, dad, family, friend? What kind of support person are we talking about here? There's different things you might want to flesh out in your policy to really recognize a support person. And then again, there's that etiquette about support people. Being human beings, we tend to converse with the person who is conversing with us, and we forget that the person with a disability is our customer, not the support person. You have to ensure your staff understands that, and that their eye contact doesn't remain on the support person and forgetting who the customer really is. These are the things you build into your policies and practices for something regarding support persons. The fourth requirement is to have some kind of policy or practice on service animals. What are service animals? How do you define service animals? First of all, important to know, service animals are allowed anywhere the public is allowed. There might be few exceptions, but they're very rare and they're under extreme circumstances. So keep that in mind. The general rule, anywhere a person is allowed, so is a service animal. However, what is a service animal? Do they have to be certified? How do you identify? How do you know? What questions can you ask? These are the things you build in to your policy or your measures so that your staff actually understands. No one wants to be the person that first greets someone who has an animal with them and says, this is my service animal, and they say, oh, okay, go in. And the next thing you know, if it's a dog, it's barking, it's snarling, it's wandering around the hallways. So you have to have some kind of policy in place to acknowledge the acceptance and the right of service animals, but also to understand what questions you can ask if you're not sure. Let's face it, service animals aren't in this little niche that they used to be in. They used to be guide dogs. In fact, the Human Rights Code even referred to service animal as a guide dog. Today, as you know, service animals are being used for so much more than guiding the blind, although they still a primary activity. They accompany people with stress syndromes. They alert people when medication is needed. They alleviate people that might, or even alert people that might be on the verge of an epileptic seizure. So these dogs have multiple uses now, and it's not quite so easy to identify by looking at the person with a disability. My advice is go to the Human Rights Commission. They have a great website. Look up the Service Animal Guide. It has a definition, what questions you can ask, and it will give you the basis of how you can start working on a service animal policy. Okay. The next requirement is disruption of accessibility services. This is fairly simple. So you do have an accessible workplace. You have an accessible bathroom, you have an elevator that takes people to different floors. It all works great, except for the days when you hear that the elevator is going to be out of service for a week, or you had an emergency flood in the bathroom and the accessible bathroom isn't functioning anymore. Okay, so you have to have policies and practices that make sure that there's notice given. If it's an emergency, notices, you should have them printed already. And they should say something like, sorry, elevator is out of order, please see receptionist for assistance. So, or if you don't have a receptionist seat, go to the service counter, whatever your entranceway requires, so people automatically know. If it's something you can anticipate, it's even good to let people know in advance, especially if you have an appointment with someone. Say, I think I should tell you the accessible washroom is under renovation and won't be available for 4 days. You might want to postpone, or let's make our appointment at a different time. Have those kind of practices that reflect that kind of acknowledgement if you have those services and something happens. The feedback process is really important in terms of your own customers. So you might think you have spotted all the barriers, solved as many problems as you can possibly imagine, but a person with disability is going to see or hear or feel something that the rest of us didn't and be able to identify it for you. We all know feedback usually comes in a negative form, but if you're doing really good things, and if you're lucky, 1 out of 10 will say, congratulations, this was a really good experience. The other 9 are going to question you about something. You have to have a feedback process. You have to listen to that feedback, and you have to respond. Two-way street. Feedback does not go one way. Someone sends you a message, you have to write a policy about what you do. Who does that go to? How long do you take to respond to them? Do you send an instant message that said, thank you for your feedback, we'll get back to you in 1, 2, 3 weeks, whatever the staff available, the size of your organization. These are the sort of things that you should put. And also, you have to give feedback the way it's given. So if people tell you verbally, they're going to expect it verbally back, or maybe on the phone. There might be a reason for that. If they send an email, don't phone them up and try to talk to them. They sent it on an email, perhaps they're hearing impaired. So you try to have different means to communicate and different ways of sending in feedback. So these are things for your consideration. I'm not telling you to do them all, but these are the kind of things if you're trying to sort of flush out those policies and practices. Training takes all those other things into consideration. And keep in mind, the policies are great, and some employees may even read them, but for most part, policies are at the upper level and no one else even looks at them. So you have to take those back practice and measures that you've gotten in your policies, and you have to train your employees. Actually train them the appropriate way to communicate, what you might be able to do with a website, how you, the questions you can ask someone with a service animal, what not to do with assistive devices. That's all part of training. There's many organizations, might even be some here, that actually offer training. It costs a little money, some cost a lot of money. Check it out, look through them a lot. I know that we've been getting a lot of calls from nonprofit organizations because of a group that has really flooded into Manitoba, and it's a business, and that's all the more power to them. The reason they are so ready to come into Manitoba and offer all this help is because they're from Ontario, and they've been through this. So they got it all ready. They're ready, they're ready for you. I'm only saying that that's not the only game in town. Their training is fine, it's online, but there's other, especially if you're in Winnipeg or if you're in an area where a Winnipeg organization has an office, there's many different types of training available out there, and oftentimes it's a lot less money. So I'm saying about training, I can't really promote or disgrace any of them. They're all offer it, and it's up to you to research which one suits your needs best. The last thing I want to talk about, well, I have one more after this, but it's not a requirement, is barrier-free access. Okay, again, we're not talking about big structural change. When I talk about barrier-free access, these are the simple things. You have a hallway. Your staff have very small offices. So there are recycling bins, there's trash cans, even the odd filing cabinet finds its way into a hallway. That's not barrier-free. We are asking you to look through your offices to make sure you have barrier-free exits, entranceways, stairs are clear of snow, the boxes and any kind of other thing that's, it might be a tripping hazard or make it difficulty for a mobility device to pass, to remove from passageways. That's what we're referring to in barrier-free access. Look around your organization, make sure that people using mobility devices can move through freely, and people, you're blind. My friend is blind and has a white cane, and walking down a very familiar route. And someone who had had one of those stand-up signs usually had it sort of tilted against the wall. But because it was in a very popular hallway, they decided we could get more attention if we moved it this way. So it actually moved into that hallway, and our offices along the hallway. So with her white cane going down, it's on a tripod. So her white cane actually went between the feet of this banner, and she walked right through it and ended up in the hospital for 2 months. So these are the kind of barriers that we're referring to in barrier-free access. Get rid of tripping hazards. Make sure those hallways are clear. Make sure there's space in a waiting room for a mobility device so that people in mobility devices aren't shoved off to the side or in a doorway. That's what barrier-free access means under this particular standard. The last one, I have an asterisk beside it because, you know, it's not a requirement for public sector. But many public sector groups, like some are doing plans, are also paying some notice to this particular requirement. And that is public accessible events. You have a public event, you want to hold a consultation, you want your membership, you know some have disabilities, perhaps you don't think they have disabilities, but they actually do. All of a sudden you're having an event that's inaccessible. All we're saying with this requirement, and the public sector does have to comply with this last requirement, is that first you send the invitations out that are accessible, so you haven't started a systemic problem by not being able to invite everybody. Make sure you choose a location that's accessible, should someone need complete accessibility. And if you have the funds, check into it first. On your invitation, you should offer accommodation if required. If someone needs ASL, if someone needs word for word, you are willing to do that for them so that they can be part of your public meeting. The reason it's not a requirement from public sector or from nonprofit organizations is that we know money's tight, and you might not always be able to do that. But keep it in the back of your mind, and keep it also in the back of your mind who you're serving, who your members are, who your customers are, and you might consider at least looking at that last requirement and writing something about your willingness to try to abide by this standard, something to that effect. Oh, yes. I've finished. Is there any questions about any of what I've babbled on about for the last 40 minutes? What I like to say to people that have no questions, I must be so crystal clear. In reality, what you're going to find is you're going to go home and first of all have a nap because I'm sure this has been a long day, or you're going to wake up tomorrow thinking, what exactly was she saying? And that's fine, because I know sometimes questions at the moment, unless I was on this panel, that they're kind of hard to wrap your mind around all this. It's a lot of information to hit you all at once. So this is my offer. I'm going to show you how to contact the Disability Issues Office. And you call anytime. You can ask for me. You can talk to anyone in the office. If there's a question, I was at a presentation the other day, and at the time I thought I understood it, but then when I actually started working on something, it went right out of my head. Call us. Check out that website. See if the answer is there for you. There's no problem with that. We take calls all the time. The other thing we will do, if you decide to start putting your policies and practices together and you're not sure if you're on the right course, you can send them to us. It's not an obligation. It is something we offer as assistance. You can send it. You can send it to me or anyone in the office. It'll eventually probably end up on my desk anyway. And you send me your draft. And I will put it through. We have a little grid going to make sure you've at least addressed the 8 or 9 requirements, and that you're in the right direction. Or perhaps you've used the wrong wordage, and we'll try to help you through that entire process. That's another thing we do. Like I said, it's not under the law, you don't have to, but it is a service that's offered if you start having those questions, or you are thinking, well, I understood it at the moment, but now that I'm working on it, I haven't got a clue what I'm doing, which really a lot of people do experience, and that's quite understandable. So where is my, yes?
Around accessibility plans. Can you hear me? Little mic. Around accessibility plans. So
yes.
You said this is something that you help with?
I will help with, if you as a nonprofit that does not have to do an accessibility plan, but you decide you want to, and like I said, a lot of now they are mostly the large ones, but they are doing plans anyway. First thing, it is on the website. You look at accessibility plans and it'll take you through it. But again, you're just reading. You're reading a bunch of stuff. I can walk you through it, and because we don't really do presentations on them anymore. Or if you want to attempt it on your own, you can send your plan to me and I'll tell you what points you've missed or where you should go or the direction you're going. Yes.
And do you have a template to work from? Or
when you look at that, when you go to accessibility plans on the website, there's an entire booklet that shows you step by step how to put together an accessibility plan, getting your crew together, who is your coordinator, who is part of that team, what are the barriers, what are your successes already. An important part, which I think most of you will be familiar with, consultation. Don't assume you know everything about all disabilities and all barriers. Consult with people with disabilities. That's an important part of that process. Then you write a nice commitment statement that you're committed to this process, and then you start working on just like your strategic plan. These are my short-term goals. These are our medium-term. And you should list outcomes or timelines, but if it's something you know you have a real problem with stairs, you also know that your building needs to be renovated within the next 5 years. You have 5 years to start setting aside money to comply with the building code, and in the end, you'll have a more accessible place. So that's part of a plan. It's like a strategic plan. If we can set aside this amount of money this year, this amount the next year, then maybe in 5 years, and with the luck of a couple of grants, we'll be able to do this huge renovation.
Thank you.
Okay. Yes?
Can you just revisit briefly the definition of customers. I mean, we're, pretty much all of us here are in the business of supporting people with
Yes.
disabilities.
They're your customers. You're an organization, and who you are servicing or who looks for your service are those people. And they indeed are your customers. They could be members too. But usually it's the people that are seeking a service from your organization. If you are an organization that looks for housing for people with disabilities, those people are your customers.
So if, okay.
Does it make sense? I know it's a weird word.
Well, it's just, yeah, I mean, in essence, the work of removing barriers for those people is what our staff do.
I know that, yeah.
All day, every day.
But it's also the families of people, people who come to you for service, the people who come to your place for meetings, employees or potential employee candidates who come for interviews. It's anybody who's coming into your place to access something from you.
Our place mostly isn't open to the public.
But those people come in.
Do family of people, you serve people with disabilities, do their families come in with them often?
No.
No? All
It's also just how they interact with you, right? Like it's like answering the phone and your website and your printed materials and then letters that you mail out.
Yeah, we have a bit of that.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
we
you know,
normally send them out in 10-point font. You're probably going to want to switch that to like a 14-point font.
Yeah, and I totally acknowledge that you are a group of people that do wonderful work with people with disabilities already. So a lot of this is, yeah, of course we do that. It's the common sense thing to do. This act and this particular standard is saying, good, fine, you still have to put it in writing. Put down in writing what you are, unless if you have like a really small group and you don't even have 20 employees, and I think some of you probably don't, you may not have to actually write it down. But by not writing down, each one of your employees has to be able to answer that question. Someone comes in who has a disability and they say, I'm not really sure what your policy is on assistive devices. And the employee says, well, I don't know either, because we haven't got anything written down. So you're not obligated to write it down unless you have 20 or more employees. But those 20 or less employees better know what those policies and practices are. That's why I say, write them down. So much easier, just write them down. If you only got 1 or 2 employees, I get it. But that's the way the law says. Some of it is common sense. You got 19 employees, so you escape having to write things down. You better make sure every one of those 19 employees know what your policies and practices are on those 8 requirements, okay?
If you could find a way for our employees to know all our policies and procedures, that'd be awesome.
I don't have a magic way. However, I will tell you this. What I have learned is if you write policy in gobbledygook, like the government does, sorry, they're all gone, they will never read them. You write it in nice, plain language that really interests them, they might be more inclined to look at it. If you say your training is attached to these policies, we advise you read them in advance, they may read them. I think those are the sort of the tools you might try to use to get employees to look at policies. And maybe not calling them policies might be a trick too. Policies is one of those loaded words, so it's up to you how you address that. It's not just my thoughts. Okay, I have a few more things to show. I can whip through them, or in sympathy with your very long day, I can do it a wrap right now. What is your pleasure? The rest is just updates, just to let you know where other people are in this system. I think it does show good faith on many organizations that are moving forward, so you know that you're now part of that process of moving forward.
I think you should show us.
Okay, we'll go through it quickly. So here's an update. The Government of Manitoba Housing Accessibility Plan and an Accessible Customer Service Policy. All 4 corporations have plans, as do all regional health authorities. 9 of the 10 large municipalities have plans. I understand the other one is pending, but it has been pending for some time now. So we're keeping a closer watch on that last one. All school divisions and 7 of the 8 university and colleges have now completed their plans. Say colleges and universities. All have completed or are in the process of completing, which means they have like less than a month to finish their customer service policies. But I'm getting a sense now that they are near completion, they have been completed. Once they're completed, you can go into any public sector organization and ask to see them. That's the first sign you know whether or not they've actually got them done. They should be able to provide them to you. In fact, they should be on their website. So that's the first clue. All accessibility plans must be on the website. You should ask if their customer service plans are on the website or you want to see them. They should be for the public. If we're well into the next year and you don't see those things, or you ask and they don't have them, you know they're out of compliance. The disability office is not the police, but certainly if you let us know that someone's out of compliance, we don't phone them and say, okay, you got a fine, you didn't do it. What we do is we say, all right, you're not in compliance. What do you need us to do to get you into compliance? Do we have to revisit this? Do we you need another workshop? And we will go through that education process for a bit. But having said that, Jay Rogers, who you met earlier, sitting at this table, is the compliance director of this act. And eventually, if we get no pleasure, it's sent to him. Our office doesn't do that, but he is the compliance director. And it's up to him to decide what to do with that organization that is not just out of compliance, but sort of adamantly out of compliance. It appears they're never going to be in compliance. That's what he will be looking after. Okay, one more. Okay, smaller municipalities have completed their plans, which is great. Some of them are right now earnestly working on their customer service standard, even though their compliance date is until 2018. So I'm saying that because most of them have come to the workshops. Our workshops now that we do have, and they're about once or twice a month. You can check on that website to see. You hear this kind of presentation again, but the difference in a workshop is that when you're into tables like that, I start assigning tables different requirements. And as a group, you kind of try to cobble together what you think is needed in a practice or measure that would assist an organization in that requirement. And then we all share with each other. So it's a slightly different experience, which if you feel you need that to proceed with writing down your requirements, check the website. I can tell you, unfortunately, they're full right now until the new year, but we are planning, there's some listed for the new year that aren't full, and we'll be doing more right throughout the winter. I like to tell people, you know, when I look at some of the public sector organizations that have done their plans and then some that are maybe a little behind on their customer service standard, what I take away from that is the spirit of the act is still there. Whether or not they've actually got it done by November, the certain day at a certain time, they actually are working on it. The whole idea of the act is behind them. And I know the word is spreading. Like I know there's like 1 million people here. But we have reached 6,500 of those people. And hopefully they've told 6,500 more. So the word is getting out about the importance of the act, compliance with the act, and now our real steady stream of communication is to nonprofits and private businesses to get on board with this and start looking at this seriously because of the deadline of next year. I'll let you know where the employment standard is. We've gone through consultations. The recommendations from those consultations went to the minister. Scott Fielding has reviewed and considered the recommendations. The government's proposed standard, when he looks at them, he can accept, reject, or amend any of the council's recommendations. The council is the advisory council, group of people put together from various walks of life, people with disabilities, people from business, people from hotels, people from public sector. They're the council that reviews the recommendations. They do have the power to accept, reject, or amend, or the minister does. The government's proposed standard is now posted on that website I told you about. It's up there, it's been up there for about a week and a half. You have 60 days to comment. So this is your last chance to comment on what the proposed law will be. If there's enough comments and the minister decides, he could make a final amendment to that act. If not, it will be passed and go to the cabinet for approval, and we're anticipating that to become law by early 2018. Okay, here's more. Oh, this is just the roundup. So that's the update. I can wrap it up now. You guys are looking tired. There's about 3 more slides, which just basically says, all right, in a snapshot, this is what I've already told you. Snapshot? No. Understand that pet policies do not apply to service animals in your establishment. Service animals are working dogs. Write a service animal policy. If you want to have a pet policy, fine. They're not the same thing. They're totally different. Service animal policy is one of the requirements. Patience. Be patient with people with disabilities. It doesn't matter if they're walking slower, talking slower, their mind works slower. It all requires us to exercise more patience when we're giving customer service. More ways to provide excellent customer service. That pen and paper, have it handy for people that might have a problem or a difficulty in communicating with you. And take the service to the customer. So when you are faced with a big stairway, you're on the 2nd floor, the only way to your office is the 2nd floor. However, there's a main floor, you know there's an office space there. There might be even a coffee shop down the street. You want to meet with this client, this person who wants to access your services. Take that service to the person. Don't try to figure out ways of getting them up the staircase. Maybe you can meet downstairs. Maybe you can meet down the hall. When my mother, who has disabilities, had to meet with her lawyer, I drove her there. I had to go stand in the cold because the lawyer went into her car, which became her office, and they held the meeting in the car. That's how you bring the service to a person. You don't always have to try to fix that stair problem. What am I going to do? We can't do it. We haven't got the money. Think outside the box. How can I take that service to that person? Active offers, I refer to this, how can we help? Great thing to have. In this case, it says, how can we help? Please inform reception if you require any assistance for service. And it has a couple of the international signs on there. So that is kind of signage that really helps. It's great with your communication requirement to have that simple how we can help, and usually somewhere to go to receive it, or to say, okay, you said how can I help? I need help reading this form. Active offer also can be put on your brochures. You could even put it on those forms. So right at the bottom in print big enough to read, this document is available in a different format. That might mean it's on your website that is easier to read. You can actually print it in a larger font. It's in a more accessible format for them. That's another active offer. It says it right on your publications. That's it. Now you know how to reach me. That's my contact. There's the website again. I've also left at the front, for those of you who wish, it's our website card. It's actually a little magnifying glass. Comes in really handy when you're shopping and you can't read the price of things. It also has the website on it, so please feel free. I did also bring some brochures if you'd like them. The website card obviously is not on the website, but the brochure is, so you don't have to pick up paper if you don't really want to. Give me a call. If you think of a question you didn't think of today, call me. If you are starting to work on something and you need some advice, call me. If you have a draft ready, send it to me, and we'll be as much assistance to you as we can. And that's it.
Thanks, Patricia, and thanks for being so accessible for people. That's fantastic. So that draws our day to a close. Thank you all. That might have been our marathon meeting of the past 3.5 decades. Appreciate all your time very much. And again, thank you, Patricia, for the timely information. Thanks, everyone. Drive safe, eh? The roads are gridlocked apparently, and no fun.
How long took you to get to it? Hour and a half.
Left and here I have a pen. I have to just
And sounds like you took this because I
always use both, right?
I talked with Vince too. I got some photos with that in my hand.
Do you?
You're still So I'm just gonna slip my
Sure, yeah.